Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Rebecca Thornton, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I know these mountains like the back of my hand, every trail, every cave, every hidden danger that can kill you if you're not careful. People think being a ranger is about giving directions to tourists and checking camping permits. They don't know about the real work. The middle of the night rescue calls, the parents screaming because their kid wandered off, the bodies we sometimes find when we're too late. Growing up in these Kentucky hills, I heard all the old stories, voices calling from empty valleys, lights dancing where no lights should be. My grandmother swore the mountains were alive, watching us. I always figured it was just wind through the rocks and folks with too much imagination. Until that November day in 1978 when I heard children singing where no children should be. It was late November, and the first hard freeze had hit Devil's Backbone Ridge. That's what we call the limestone cliffs that run through Daniel Boone National Forest, jagged rocks that look like a spine poking up through the earth. The place has always given people the creeps. Cherokee won't go near it. Say it's where spirits weep. Local families have their own stories too. Kids going missing, voices echoing from the caves. I never believed any of it. In 17 years, I'd seen plenty of missing persons cases get solved with logic and hard work. Kids get lost, panic, take shelter in caves. Sometimes hypothermia gets them before we can find them. It's sad, but it's not supernatural. That morning started like any other rescue call. 2 kids, brother and sister, aged 8 and 10, had been missing for 18 hours. Their parents, the Millers, had driven up from Louisville for a weekend camping trip. The kids went for a short hike near Devil's Backbone and never came back. When I met the parents at the trailhead, Mrs. Miller grabbed my arm. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. Fear. They said they were following singing voices, she whispered. Said there were children playing games in the woods, calling for them to come play too. I nodded and wrote it down, but inside I rolled my eyes. Kids have wild imaginations. They probably heard hikers on another trail and invented the rest. The weather was turning nasty fast. Snow mixed with freezing rain, and the temperature was dropping to 15 degrees. Fog filled the valleys so thick you couldn't see 20 feet ahead. My radio crackled with static. These ridges are bad for signals, all that limestone interference. I assembled my team, Tom Bradley, a cave rescue specialist, and Sarah Chen, our best tracker. We'd worked together for years. They trusted my judgment, and I trusted theirs. If anyone could find these kids alive, it was us. The trail to Devil's Backbone is narrow and steep, winding between 100-year-old pines and sandstone cliffs. The higher you go, the quieter it gets. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seems to hold its breath up there. We found the first clue about a mile up the trail, small footprints in the mud, heading off the main path toward the cave entrance. Tom examined them with his flashlight. 2 sets of prints, he said. Size matches what the parents told us. They were walking, not running, no signs of panic. That was good news and bad news. Good because it meant they weren't fleeing from something. Bad because it meant they went into those caves on purpose. The mouth of Devil's Backbone cave system looks like a gaping wound in the cliff face. It's maybe 6 feet wide and tall enough for an adult to walk through without ducking. Most tourists take one look and decide they'd rather stay in the sunshine. The Millers' kids apparently felt different. I checked my gear one more time. Headlamp, rope, radio, first aid kit, emergency flares. Sarah had the thermal imaging scanner. Tom carried the cave rescue equipment. We had enough supplies for a full day underground if needed. Radio check, I called to base camp. Static answered me. Might be the weather, Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced. I should have listened to that little voice in my head telling me something wasn't right. Should have called for backup from the next county over. Should have waited for the weather to clear. Instead, I clicked on my headlamp and stepped into the darkness. The temperature inside the cave hit us like a wall. I expected the usual cave chill, constant 55 degrees no matter what season. Instead, Warmth wrapped around us like a blanket. My breath didn't fog. The limestone walls felt almost cozy. "That's weird," Sarah muttered, checking her thermometer. "Reads 72 degrees in here." Tom shrugged. "Maybe there's a hot spring somewhere deeper in. These old caves can be full of surprises." I wanted to believe him, but in 17 years I'd never encountered anything like this. Caves don't just decide to be warm. There are rules, laws of physics, things that make sense. We followed the main passage, which sloped gently downward. Our footsteps echoed strangely, not the sharp, quick echoes you'd expect, but soft whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Every few steps, I stopped to listen for voices, crying, any sign of the missing children. That's when I heard it. Faint, but definitely there. Children singing. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." The old nursery rhyme drifted from somewhere deeper in the cave. All three of us froze. "You hear that?" I whispered. Tom and Sarah nodded. Their faces looked pale in the headlamp glow. We hurried forward, following the sound. The main passage split into 3 smaller tunnels. The singing seemed to come from the middle one, so that's where we went. About 400 feet in, Sarah's scanner beeped. She'd found something with her. Thermal imaging. "Over here," she called. 2 backpacks sat in a perfect circle around a natural formation of limestone that looked almost like a table. The packs were dry, clean, arranged with mathematical precision. No signs of struggle, no signs of fear. I opened the first pack. Sandwiches, juice boxes, a coloring book. Normal kid stuff. But when I flipped through the coloring book, my skin crawled. Every picture showed the same thing. Children holding hands in dark places. Children playing in caves. Children with huge smiles and black, empty eyes. Tom found a drawing folded up in the second pack. It showed stick figures of kids playing Ring Around the Rosie in what looked like a cave. At the bottom, in crayon letters, "Come play with us forever." "Kids have wild imaginations," Tom said, but his voice shook. The singing started again, closer this time. "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." But there was something wrong with the voices, too many of them. Like a whole choir of children, not just 2 lost kids. We pressed deeper into the tunnel. The walls were covered with old scratches and marks. Some looked recent, others worn smooth by time. As we passed under a low overhang, my headlamp flickered. "Battery's fine," I muttered, smacking it with my palm. Sarah's light dimmed too. Then Tom's. One by one, our lights faded to barely a glow, casting weird shadows that seemed to move on their own. "This doesn't make sense," Tom said. "These are brand new batteries." In the dim light, we almost missed the footprints. Small bare feet, pressed into clay that shouldn't exist this far underground. The prints led to a passage I'd never seen on any cave map, a narrow crack in the wall that angled sharply downward. "That passage isn't supposed to be there," I said. I'd studied every survey of this cave system. I knew every mapped tunnel and chamber. But here was a passage that simply didn't exist on paper. "Maybe the surveys missed it," Sarah suggested. "All of them? For 50 years?" Cold air started flowing up from the new passage, carrying a smell like wet earth and something else. Something sweet and rotten at the same time. And voices. Definitely voices. "Rebecca? Rebecca, is that you?" I nearly dropped my flashlight. That voice, it sounded exactly like my daughter Emma. But Emma had been dead for 3 years, fell into a sinkhole while hiking with friends. I never even got to say goodbye. "Mom? Why didn't you save me, Mom?" My hands shook so hard I could barely hold my gear. Tom grabbed my shoulder. "Rebecca, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to tell him what I'd heard, but the rational part of my brain kicked in. Stress. Guilt. Acoustic tricks in the cave. There had to be an explanation. The children's singing started again, but now it was coming from the impossible passage. Follow me, down below." That wasn't Ring Around the Rosie anymore. That was something else entirely. "We need to check that passage," I said. "The kids might have gone down there." Sarah shook her head. "It looks dangerous. Steep angle, unknown depth. We should call for backup." I tried the radio. Nothing but static mixed with what sounded like children laughing. "Backup's hours away in this weather," I said. "Those kids have been missing 18 hours. Every minute counts." It was true, but that wasn't the real reason I wanted to go down there. That voice calling my name. Emma's voice. Part of me knew it was impossible, but part of me desperately wanted to believe. Tom checked his rope and harness. If we're doing this, we do it right. Full cave rescue protocol. We rigged the rope system and started our descent into the unmapped passage. As we went deeper, the temperature got warmer, the air got thicker, and the voices got louder. Come play with us, Rebecca. Come play with us forever. 20 feet down, 30, 40. The passage opened into a chamber that shouldn't exist. Our headlamps, still dim and flickering, revealed something that made my blood freeze. Children, dozens of them, standing in a perfect circle, holding hands, singing in voices that echoed from everywhere and nowhere. But their clothes were wrong. Old-fashioned, from different time periods, and when they turned to look at us, their eyes were black holes and faces pale as moonlight. In the center of the circle sat two modern children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10 years old, the Miller kids. They were alive, but their eyes had that same empty darkness. "We've been waiting for you," the children said in unison. "We've been so lonely." I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. When I opened my eyes, the ghostly children were gone. Just the Miller kids sat in the chamber, looking dazed but alive. "Thank God," Sarah breathed. "Kids, are you okay? Your parents are looking for you." The little girl, Emma Miller, looked up at us with confused eyes. "We were playing games. The other children taught us songs." "What other children?" Tom asked gently. The boy Jake pointed to empty air. "They're shy now. They don't like bright lights." Our headlamps flickered again, dimming to almost nothing. In the near darkness, I caught glimpses of movement, shapes that looked like children, watching us from the shadows. "We need to get out of here," I said, "now." But when we turned back to our rope, it was gone. The passage we'd come down was sealed with rock, as if it had never existed. "That's impossible," Tom said, running his hands over solid limestone. "We just came through here." I tried the radio again. This time I got a response, but not from base camp. "Rebecca? Rebecca, come play with us." Emma's voice, clear as day, coming through the static. Sarah was examining the chamber walls with her dying flashlight. "Look at this," she called, scratched. Into the limestone were dozens of names and dates, some recent, some going back decades. Sarah read them aloud. Mary Hutchins, 1943. Billy Carter, 1956. Susan Wright, 1967. She paused. "Rebecca, these are all children who went missing in this area over the years." But it was the newest carving that made my heart stop. Emma Thornton, 1975. My daughter's name, the year she died. "I don't understand," I whispered. The Miller children started singing again. "Come and play, come and stay. In the darkness, we will play." Their voices had changed, deeper, older, like they'd been singing for years instead of hours. Tom grabbed my arm. "We need to find another way out. Check every wall, every crevice." We split up, examining the chamber. It was bigger than I'd first realized, with several alcoves and side passages. In one alcove, I found something that made my skin crawl. Toys. Dozens of them. Dolls and balls and wooden horses, some looking brand new, others ancient and rotted. In another alcove, Sarah found children's clothing, pants and dresses and shoes from different decades, all small sizes, all arranged neatly like someone was planning to wear them again. "This is wrong," Sarah said. "All wrong. We need to get out of here now." But every passage we found led deeper into the cave system, not out. And in every passage, we heard singing. Children's voices, but too many of them. Like a whole school of kids had come down here to play. That's when I saw her, Emma, my daughter, standing at the mouth of one of the side passages, wearing the same hiking clothes she'd died in 3 years ago. "Mommy," she said, "why didn't you come find me? I knew it wasn't real. I knew my daughter was dead, buried in Pine Hill Cemetery. But my heart didn't care what my brain knew." "Emma?" I stepped toward her. "Don't," Tom said sharply. "Rebecca, that's not your daughter." But Emma looked so real, so alive. She held out her hand, to me. "Come play with us, Mommy. We're having so much fun down here. We never have to grow up. We never have to leave." Behind her, I could see other children emerging from the shadows. The Miller kids stood up and walked over to join them, all of them holding hands. All of them, smiling with those black, empty eyes. "The game never ends," they sang together. "Hide and seek forever. Never found, never leave, play with us forever." Tom grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back. "We're leaving. Now." But the children moved to block every exit. They weren't threatening exactly, just determined. Like kids who really, really don't want playtime to end. "You can't leave yet," Emma said sadly. "We just started having fun." The air in the chamber was getting thicker, warmer. I could barely breathe. Sarah was checking her scanner frantically. "Body heat signatures all around us," she whispered. "Dozens of them. But they're too cold, like they're not fully alive." That's when I understood. These weren't living children. They were spirits. Ghosts of kids who'd gone missing over the decades, trapped down here, playing eternal games in the dark. "What do you want?" I asked. "Friends," Emma said simply. "We're so lonely, Mommy. Down here, all by ourselves, playing the same games over and over. We want new friends to play with." She gestured to the Miller children, who were starting to look pale and strange themselves. "They're learning our games now. Soon they'll be just like us. And then we won't be lonely anymore." I realized with horror what was happening. The ghost children were somehow draining the life from living kids, turning them into spirits like themselves. The Miller children were dying slowly, becoming part of this underground nightmare. "Let them go," I said. "They have families, people who love them." "You have me," Emma said. "Stay with us, Mommy. Stay and play forever." The chamber started to spin. My vision blurred. Whatever was happening to the Miller kids was starting to happen to us too. Tom collapsed to his knees, gasping. Sarah leaned against the wall, her face gray. The ghost children clapped their hands and laughed. New friends, forever and ever." That's when I heard it. Water. Rushing water. Getting louder. The chamber was flooding. Water poured through cracks in the walls, rising fast around our feet. The ghost children didn't seem to notice or care. They kept singing and clapping as the ice-cold flood reached our ankles, then our knees. "The spring melt," Tom gasped. "Combined with the storm, the whole cave system must be flooding." But this was November. There shouldn't be any spring melt. Unless the ghost children were somehow controlling the water, using it to trap us here permanently. Sarah pulled out her emergency flare and lit it. Red light flooded the chamber, and for a moment the ghost children flickered like bad TV reception. "They don't like the light," she shouted. I grabbed a flare from my pack, but before I could light it, Emma stepped closer. "Please don't, Mommy. The light hurts us." Her face was so sad, so lost. My heart broke all over again seeing her like this. "Tell me what happened," I said. "Tell me how you really died." Emma's expression changed. The fake childish happiness melted away, replaced by pain and confusion. "I fell," she whispered. "Down in Laurel Cave, I was with my friends exploring. I slipped on wet rocks and fell into the underground river. I called for you, Mommy. I called and called, but you never came." Tears ran down my face. "I tried to find you. I searched for 3 days." "I know. But it was too late. I was already here, already part of the game." Behind her, the other ghost children were getting agitated. The water was up to our waists now, and Tom was struggling to keep his head above it. "What game?" I asked. "What are you really playing?" A new voice answered, older, deeper. A boy who looked maybe 12, wearing clothes from the 1920 seconds. "Hide and seek," he said. "We've been hiding for so long. But nobody ever finds us. Nobody ever ends the game." "Who are you?" "I'm Billy. Billy Morrison. I was working in the mine when it collapsed. Me and 22 other kids. We were down here playing hide and seek during our break when the tunnel caved in. Nobody knew we were here." The truth hit me like a physical blow. These weren't just random ghost children. They were the kids from the 1920 seconds mining disaster. Children who'd been working illegally in the coal mines, crushed when the tunnels collapsed during their lunch break. The mine connects to this cave system, I realized. You've all been trapped here together. Billy nodded sadly. We started the game to keep from being scared, hide and seek in the tunnels. But then we died, And the game never ended. We kept playing, waiting for someone to find us and declare it over. So you take other children to keep you company? They find us, Emma said. They hear us singing and come to play. But once they start playing, they can't leave until the game ends. The water was up to our chests. Tom grabbed the Miller children, trying to lift them higher, but they seemed to weigh nothing. They were already more spirit than flesh. How do we end the game? I shouted over the rushing water. Billy looked confused. Someone has to find us. Someone has to win. But I did find you. I found all of you. No, Emma said sadly. You found us, but you haven't won yet. To win hide and seek, you have to find the best hiding spot. The place where nobody will ever look. She pointed to a passage I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind the rushing water. The deepest place, Billy said, where we first hid when the mine collapsed. That's where the game started. That's where it has to end. The water was at our necks now. In minutes, we'd all drown. But to reach that passage, I'd have to dive underwater into an unmapped tunnel system that could go on for miles. If I find the hiding spot, I gasped, will you let everyone go? All of them? The ghost children looked at each other uncertainly. The game has rules, Billy said finally. If you find our best hiding spot, you win. But if you get lost down there, you become part of the game forever. I looked at Tom and Sarah, both barely keeping their heads above water. The Miller children were fading fast, becoming more transparent by the second. Rebecca, don't, Tom pleaded. It's suicide. But I thought about Emma, trapped down here for 3 years. About all the ghost children, playing their endless game because no adult had ever bothered to understand what they really needed. I'm going, I said. I took the deepest breath I could and dove. The underwater passage was a nightmare of sharp rocks and crushing currents. My headlamp was completely dead now, so I followed the flow of water, hoping it would lead me to the source. My lungs burned. My fingers bled from scraping against limestone. Just when I thought I couldn't hold my breath any longer, I surfaced in a small air pocket. I could hear voices echoing from ahead, children crying, not singing. The final chamber was tiny, barely big enough for 23 small bodies. Skeletons lay curled together in the corner, still wearing the tattered remains of 1,920 seconds work clothes. These were the real remains of the children who died in the mine collapse. In the center of the room, one skeleton was different, smaller, wearing a modern hiking outfit, Emma's real body. She'd found this place when she fell through the underground river, found the mine disaster children, and stayed to comfort them as she died. I win, I whispered to the darkness. I found you. I found your best hiding place. The effect was immediate. Light filled the chamber, not from any lamp, but from the children themselves. They appeared around their skeletons, but different now. Peaceful, happy. You won, Billy said, his voice full of wonder. Someone finally won our game. Can I take everyone home now? Emma stepped forward and hugged me. For just a moment, she felt solid and warm, like she had when she was alive. I can't come home, Mommy, but I can finally go where I'm supposed to go. And so can they. One by one, the ghost children faded into light, their expressions serene for the first time. Billy was last. Thank you for playing with us, he said. Thank you for helping us stop hiding. Then they were gone, and I was alone with the bones. The water started receding immediately. I swam back through the passage, following my rope trail to the main chamber. Tom and Sarah were there, gasping and alive. The Miller children were solid again, breathing normally, looking confused but human. What happened? Sarah asked. I won their game, I said simply. The cave passages had returned to normal. Our lights worked. The radio crackled with rescue calls from the surface. Everything was exactly as it should be in a normal cave system. As we led the Miller children toward the surface, I took one last look back. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw Emma waving goodbye from the shadows. I love you too, sweetheart, I whispered. The official report was simple. Successful rescue of 2 missing children from Devil's Backbone cave system. Cave-in and flash flooding had temporarily trapped all rescue personnel, but no serious injuries occurred. Geological survey recommended that deeper passages be sealed to prevent future incidents. The Miller children recovered completely. They remembered playing games with imaginary friends in the cave, but the memories faded quickly, the way children's dreams do. Their parents were grateful and asked no difficult questions. My team backed up my story, without me even asking. Tom, Sarah, and I never talked about what really happened down there. Some experiences are too strange to put into words, even among people who shared them. But things changed after that day. Devil's Backbone Cave was officially closed to the public. The Cherokee Tribal Council performed a cleansing ceremony at the entrance, declaring the spirits finally at rest. Local families reported peaceful dreams and a sense of closure they hadn't felt in decades. I changed too. The guilt that had eaten at me for 3 years, the constant what-if scenarios about Emma's death finally faded. I understood now that some things happen beyond our control, and that love doesn't end with death. I kept working as a ranger, but I approached the job differently. When families reported hearing children's voices in empty valleys, I listened more carefully. When hikers mentioned feeling watched in certain areas, I paid attention. The mountains hold secrets, and some of those secrets need respect, not skepticism. 6 months later, I was called to investigate another missing child case near Mammoth Cave. A 7-year-old boy had vanished while hiking with his scout troop. The other children claimed they'd heard him talking to someone just before he disappeared. He said there was a girl who wanted to show him something cool, one scout told me, but there wasn't any girl there. I found the boy 3 hours later, safe and sound, sitting by himself in a small cave. He was confused about how he'd gotten there and kept asking about the nice girl who was helping him hide. But this time, there were no ghost children, no supernatural encounters. Just a lost kid who'd followed his imagination into trouble and gotten lucky. Maybe that's because the spirits at Devil's Backbone had moved on to wherever they belonged. Maybe they'd helped other lost children find their way home instead of keeping them forever. Or maybe I'd just learned to tell the difference between real supernatural activity and ordinary wilderness dangers. The mining company records from the 1,920 seconds were accidentally destroyed in a bureaucratic filing error. The families of the missing children received closure notifications that their children's remains had been found and properly buried. No one asked too many questions about where or how. Sometimes I visit Emma's grave in Pine Hill Cemetery. I bring flowers and tell her about my day, about the people I've helped, and the beauty of the mountains she loved. I don't hear her voice anymore, but I feel her presence, peaceful now, free. The mountains of Kentucky still hold their secrets. There are other places where tragedy has left spiritual scars, other wilderness areas where the line between natural and supernatural blurs. I've learned to approach them all with respect, but every now and then, when I'm out on a rescue call in some remote cave system, I'll hear children's laughter echoing in the distance. Not the lost, desperate sound of trapped spirits, but genuine joy. The sound of kids playing games in the sunshine. And I know that somewhere, 23 children who hid in the darkness for 70 years are finally playing in the light. The game is over. Everyone was found. Everyone gets to go home. Asterisk. If you're ever hiking in the Appalachian Mountains and you hear children singing where no children should be, listen carefully. They might just be playing harmless games. But if they ask you to come play hide-and-seek forever, politely decline. Some games are too dangerous to join, and some hiding spots are meant to stay found. Asterisk, asterisk. Trust your instincts. Respect the warnings. And remember that sometimes the best way to help lost souls is simply to acknowledge their presence and show them the way home. Asterisk. My name is Joshua Whitmore, and I've been a ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 15 years. People think being a forest ranger is all campfires and nature walks, but most days I'm dealing with lost hikers, drunk campers, and the occasional poacher. What happened to me last October changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I work the Iron Mountain area in Tennessee, where the ridges roll on forever, and the valleys hide secrets older than America itself. My specialty is historical preservation, which means I spend a lot of time protecting old Cherokee sites and abandoned settlements from people who don't know better. It's work that matters to me personally. My grandmother was Melungeon, one of those mysterious mixed-race families that settled these ridges back in the 1800s. Growing up, Grandma told me stories about our people, how they came from nowhere and belonged everywhere, how they faced hatred from both white and black communities because nobody could figure out what they were. She had olive skin and straight black hair, spoke Cherokee as well as English, and always said our family had gifts that went back generations. Some of our people could change their nature when they needed to, she'd whisper when I was little. Not their hearts, mind you, but their shape. It was how we survived when survival meant being something other than what we were. I grew up thinking these were just stories. Metaphors for how the Melungeons adapted to persecution, by blending in, by becoming whatever they needed to be to stay alive. Even after I became a ranger and started researching our history seriously, I figured the shape-shifting legends were just folklore. Ways to explain genetic traits that made some families look different from their neighbors. The call came in on October 15th, 1981. A family of hikers, the Brestons from Knoxville, had gone missing somewhere near Newman's Ridge. Their camp was found abandoned, but not the way you'd expect from people who got lost or hurt. Their tent was still standing, food was still on the camp table, but their clothes were scattered around the site, shredded like something with claws had torn through them. No blood, though. That was the first thing that bothered me. I drove up to the site that morning through fog so thick I could barely see the road. October in these mountains can be tricky. Warm days and cold nights create weather that seems to have a mind of its own. The fog hung in the valleys like something alive, shifting and moving even when there was no wind. The campsite was on a flat spot near Stone Mountain, about 3 miles from the nearest trail. The Brestons had picked a good spot sheltered from wind, close to water, far enough from the main paths to have privacy. Too far for anyone to hear them scream. I spent an hour documenting everything with my camera and notebook. The tent was undisturbed. Sleeping bags still zipped up, neat and tidy. Their car keys were on the folding table next to a half-eaten can of beans. But their clothes, that was something else. Every piece of clothing had been torn apart, but not randomly. The tears followed specific patterns, like something with 4-inch claws had deliberately shredded them. I'd seen what bears could do to gear, and this wasn't it. Bears are messy. They tear and scatter and leave evidence everywhere. This looked almost careful. The strangest part was the footprints. The Brestons' tracks went from the tent toward the tree line in a straight line. Normal walking pattern, normal spacing. But about 20 feet from the tent, something changed. The prints got deeper, longer. The spacing between steps grew wider. By the time the tracks reached the trees, they weren't human footprints anymore. I followed the trail for a quarter mile before it disappeared entirely on a rock outcrop. The last clear prints I found looked like they came from something that walked on 4 legs. Something big. I radioed in my initial report and called for backup. My supervisor, Bill Hawkins, said he'd send 2 more rangers and asked if I thought we were dealing with an animal attack. Maybe, I told him. But if an animal took them, where are the bodies? That afternoon, I interviewed the hikers who'd found the campsite. A young couple from Johnson City, barely out of college, who'd been exploring the old Melungeon settlement areas for a history project. We saw the whole thing. The girl, Sarah, kept saying, we saw them change. Her boyfriend, Mike, looked embarrassed. She's been reading too many local legends for our research. When she saw the footprints, her imagination went wild. But Sarah wouldn't let it go. We were on the ridge above their camp yesterday evening. We had binoculars, doing bird watching. That family was sitting around their fire, normal as anything. Then something spooked them. They all stood up at the same time, like they heard something we couldn't. And then, she stopped talking and looked at Mike like she wanted permission to continue. Tell him, Mike said quietly. Tell him what you think you saw. They changed, Sarah whispered. 1 minute they were people, the next minute they were animals, big cats or something. They just melted and shifted and became something else. Then they ran into the forest. I wrote it all down, but I didn't believe it. Stress, distance, weird lighting, lots of things could make people think they saw something impossible. The human mind tries to make sense of things it can't understand, and sometimes it creates explanations that are stranger than the truth. But driving home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about what my grandmother used to say, about people who could change their nature when they needed to survive. The backup rangers arrived the next morning, just as the fog was starting to burn off. Tom Bradley had been working these mountains longer than me, and Janet Morrison was one of the best trackers in the service. If anyone could make sense of what happened to the Brestons, it would be them. We started by expanding our search pattern, looking for any sign of where the family might have gone after the tracks disappeared. The terrain around Newman's Ridge is rough, steep slopes covered in rhododendron thickets, so dense you can't see 3 feet ahead. Perfect country for getting lost in or for hiding things you don't want found. Tom found the first cache about a mile from the campsite. Personal items arranged in a circle on a flat rock. A watch, a wedding ring, a child's toy car, and a wallet with all the money still inside. Not scattered or dropped, but placed, like an offering. Animals don't do this, Tom said, taking pictures from every angle. People do this. Janet was studying the ground around the rock. These tracks are fresh, same pattern we saw at the camp. Human prints that change into something else. She followed the trail down into a narrow valley I'd never explored before. The trees grew thicker here, old-growth forest that blocked out most of the sky. Even in midday, it felt like twilight under that canopy. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Forest sounds I'd been hearing my whole life were just gone. The only noise was our boots on the leaf litter and our breathing. "Listen," Janet whispered, holding up her hand. In the distance, maybe half a mile away, something was howling. Not coyotes or dogs. I knew those sounds. This was deeper, more complex, like voices singing in harmony, but not quite human voices. We followed the sound deeper into the valley. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the fog that had burned off everywhere else hung thick down here. Our flashlight beams looked weird in that mist, bending and scattering like the light couldn't travel straight. That's when we found the settlement. Hidden in a fold of the ridge, protected by rock walls and dense forest, was a cluster of log cabins that shouldn't have existed. These weren't ruins or historical sites. People were living here, right now, in 1981, like it was still 1881. Smoke rose from stone chimneys, laundry hung on lines between the trees, gardens full of late-season vegetables grew in the small clearings. And there were people watching us from doorways and windows, people who looked like they'd stepped out of a history book. An old woman came walking toward us, moving with the kind of confidence that said this was her territory and we were guests. She had the olive skin and straight black hair I remembered from my grandmother, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same mountain accent. "You'd be the rangers looking for the missing family," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," I answered. "Joshua Whitmore, Cherokee National Forest Service. These are my colleagues, Tom Bradley and Janet Morrison. We're investigating the disappearance of the Breston family." The woman nodded slowly. "I'm Mary Goins. These are my people." She gestured toward the hidden settlement. "And that family you're looking for ain't missing. They're where they need to be." Tom stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to verify that they're safe. They left behind personal belongings and—" "They left behind what they couldn't take with them," Mary interrupted. "Sometimes people have to choose between the life they thought they wanted and the life they were born to live." The way she said it made my skin crawl. Not because it sounded threatening, but because it sounded familiar. Like something my grandmother might have said. "Mrs. Goins," I said carefully, "we found evidence that suggests the family might have been attacked or coerced. We need to speak with them directly." Mary Goins studied my face for a long moment. "Whitmore," she said slowly. "Your grandmother was Rebecca Whitmore, wasn't she? Rebecca Collins before she married?" My throat went tight. "Yes, ma'am." "You knew her?" "Knew her?" Mary laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Child, she was my cousin, which makes you family, and family needs to understand some things about what's happening here." She gestured for us to follow her toward the largest cabin. As we walked, I noticed the other residents watching us with expressions I couldn't read. Not hostile, exactly, but cautious, like they were waiting to see what we would do. "Your grandmother ever tell you why she left these mountains?" Mary asked as we climbed the porch steps. "She said there wasn't any future here for young people, that she wanted to see the world beyond the ridges." Mary nodded. "That's part of the truth. The other part is that she was scared of what she was becoming. Some of our bloodlines carry gifts that skip generations. Rebecca's gift was starting to show, and she chose to run from it instead of embracing it." Inside the cabin, the Breston family was sitting around a wooden table, drinking coffee and looking perfectly normal. Except for their eyes, Their eyes had changed color from the brown and blue I remembered from their driver's licenses to a golden yellow that caught the lamplight like an animal's. "Mr. and Mrs. Breston?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Ranger Whitmore. We've been looking for you." Mrs. Breston smiled, and for just a second, her teeth looked too sharp. "We're fine, Ranger. Better than fine. We're finally home." Over the next 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen in that hidden valley. The Brestons insisted they were staying voluntarily, and I had no legal grounds to force them to leave. But something was wrong with the whole situation, something that went beyond unusual living arrangements or cultural differences. The family's physical changes were subtle but consistent. Their hearing had improved dramatically. They could respond to sounds we couldn't even detect. Their movements had become more fluid, more graceful, and their eyes, those golden eyes, seemed to see things in the shadows that weren't there. I started having dreams that felt more like memories, running through the forest on 4 legs, feeling the night air through thick fur, hunting with senses so sharp I could track a deer from miles away. I'd wake up exhausted, like I'd actually been running all night, with dirt under my fingernails and scratches on my arms I couldn't explain. Tom and Janet had their own strange experiences. Tom's compass started pointing toward magnetic anomalies that didn't exist on any geological survey. Janet kept hearing voices speaking Cherokee in areas where no one else was around. Our equipment was failing in ways that didn't make sense. Cameras malfunctioned, radios picked up conversations in languages we didn't recognize, and our flashlights seemed to create shadows where shadows shouldn't exist. On the 4th night, I went back to the settlement alone. Mary Goins was waiting for me at the edge of the hidden valley, like she'd known I was coming. In the moonlight, she looked different. Younger somehow, despite her age. Her movements were too quick, too smooth. "Your grandmother's blood is calling to you," she said without preamble. "That's why you can't stay away. That's why the forest feels different to you now. Mrs. Goins, I need to understand what's happening to the Breston family. And to me." She gestured for me to follow her deeper into the settlement. This time, there were more people out and about, despite the late hour. Men and women moving between the cabins with the kind of easy confidence that comes from perfect night vision. Children playing games that seemed to involve impossible feats of speed and agility. "We are what we've always been," Mary said as we walked. The first people to settle these ridges weren't running from poverty or persecution alone. They were hiding from something else, something that made them different from ordinary folks. She led me to a cabin where an elderly man was sitting on the porch, whittling by lamplight. His hands moved with inhuman precision, carving intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. "This is Samuel Collins," Mary said. "Your grandmother's uncle, your great-uncle." Samuel looked up at me with eyes that reflected the lamplight like mirrors. "Boy looks just like Rebecca did at that age," he said in a voice like gravel. "Same stubborn chin, same scared expression when the blood starts to wake up." "What blood?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Shapeshifter blood," Samuel said simply. "Cherokee spirit warrior blood mixed with something older. Something that came from across the ocean with the first dark-skinned families that nobody could quite place. We've been hiding in these mountains for 200 years, keeping the bloodline alive, waiting for the time when the world might be ready to know we exist." He set down his whittling and stood up. In the lamplight, his shadow looked drawn too large, with edges that seemed to move independently of his body. "The Breston family carries the blood too, but they didn't know it. Stress can trigger the awakening in people who've never been taught to control it. That's what happened to them on their camping trip. Something spooked them, probably one of us checking to see what they were doing so close to our territory, and their bodies responded the way they were designed to respond. By turning into animals? My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. By becoming what we've always been underneath, Mary corrected. The human shape is just one option. The animal shape is another. With practice, you can choose which one serves you better." As if to demonstrate, she stepped back into the munner, shadows between 2 cabins. For a moment, I lost sight of her completely. Then a large mountain cat padded out of the darkness, golden eyes fixed on mine. The cat sat back on its haunches and somehow communicated without making a sound. Asterisk. This is what your grandmother ran from. This is what you're becoming. Asterisk. Then Mary was standing there again, human-shaped, like the transformation had never happened. "The awakening is already starting in you," she said. "Your senses are changing. Your dreams are showing you the truth. Soon you'll have to choose, just like your grandmother did. Accept what you are, or spend the rest of your life fighting against your own nature." I stumbled backward, my rational mind reeling. This is impossible. People don't just change into animals. There has to be a scientific explanation, genetic mutations, environmental factors, psychological suggestion. Samuel laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Boy, you can explain it any way you want. Won't change what you are. Won't stop what's coming." "What's coming?" Mary's expression darkened. "Government researchers have been sniffing around for decades, looking for us. They know families like ours exist, and they want to study us. Use us. Turn our gifts into weapons." The Breston's transformation was witnessed by more people than just those young hikers. "Word is getting out. We may not be able to hide much longer." That's when I heard the helicopters. They came in low and fast, military models with no identification markings. Searchlights swept the valley as armed figures rappelled down into the settlement. The residents of the hidden community scattered like deer, but not in panic. They moved with coordinated precision, like they'd practiced this scenario many times. "Run," Mary said, grabbing my arm. "If they capture you now, before you've learned to control the gift, they'll break your mind trying to figure out how it works." But I couldn't run. I was a federal ranger, and these people, whatever they were under my protection. Instead, I stepped into the open with my hands raised and my badge visible. "Federal Park Ranger," I shouted. "This is protected land, and you're operating without authorization." The lead operative approached me, his face hidden behind night vision goggles. "Ranger Whitmore, we've been monitoring your investigation. You need to come with us." "On whose authority?" "People with clearance levels you don't have access to." He gestured to his team. "These individuals are subjects of national security interest. We're taking them into custody for their own protection." Behind me, I heard a sound like wind through leaves, but there was no wind. When I turned around, the entire settlement had vanished. Not abandoned, vanished. The cabins were still there, but empty. The people had simply melted away into the forest like they'd never existed. Except for Mary Goines, who stepped out of the shadows in her human form, her hands raised but her eyes defiant. "You can take me," she said to the operatives. "But you'll never find the others, and you'll never understand what we are just by cutting us open and studying our blood." The lead operative nodded to his team, and they moved to surround Mary. As they closed in, she looked directly at me. "Joshua," she said, "your grandmother made her choice. Now you have to make yours. Be what you were born to be, or spend your life serving people who see you as a specimen to be studied." Then she was gone, not captured, not escaped, but transformed. The mountain cat that had been Mary Goines bounded into the trees faster than the operatives could react, leaving them with nothing but empty air and the echo of her words. The lead operative turned to me. "You're coming with us, Ranger. You've been exposed to classified phenomena, and you need to be debriefed." As they escorted me toward their helicopter, I realized that my old life, the life where I was just a forest ranger with an interest in local history, was over. Whatever I was becoming, whatever choice I had to make, it would have to be made soon, because the people who had taken me weren't interested in protecting anyone's rights or preserving anyone's culture. They were interested in turning genetic gifts into government weapons, and they thought I might be one of those weapons. The government facility was 3 hours away by helicopter, hidden in a valley that didn't appear on any maps I'd ever seen. From the outside, it looked like a research station, clean white buildings surrounded by chain-link fences, with the kind of bland architecture that was designed to be forgotten. Inside, it was a prison. They separated me from my gear and put me in a room that looked like a combination medical facility and interrogation chamber. Bright lights, stainless steel surfaces, cameras in every corner, and the constant hum of ventilation systems that never quite managed to mask the smell of fear and antiseptic. Dr. Elizabeth Warren introduced herself as a geneticist specializing in human physiological anomalies. She was young, professional, and had the kind of detached curiosity that made my skin crawl. "Ranger Whitmore," she said, settling into a chair across from me with a thick file folder. "We've been monitoring your family line for quite some time. Your grandmother, Rebecca Whitmore, was flagged by our predecessors in the 1940 seconds as a person of interest. She successfully avoided our attention by leaving the mountains and integrating into mainstream society. But the genetic markers don't just disappear. She opened the folder and showed me photographs, surveillance photos of my grandmother as a young woman, documents detailing her family history, and genetic charts that meant nothing to me but apparently meant a lot to Dr. Warren. The Melungeon populations of Appalachia carry genetic variations that shouldn't exist in normal human beings, she continued. Enhanced sensory processing, increased bone density, unusual healing rates, and most significantly, a form of controlled cellular metamorphosis that allows for dramatic physical transformation. You're talking about shape-shifting like it's a medical condition. Because it is, Doctor. Warren leaned forward. It's a genetic adaptation that probably developed in isolated populations as a survival mechanism. The ability to alter physical form in response to environmental stressors would have provided significant evolutionary advantages. She stood up and moved to a wall monitor that displayed brain scans and blood work. I didn't recognize. We've been studying subjects with these genetic markers for decades, Ranger Whitmore. We know that the transformation ability is triggered by extreme stress, enhanced by certain environmental factors, and controlled by a combination of neurological and hormonal processes we're only beginning to understand. Subjects? I repeated. You mean prisoners. We mean volunteers, participating in important research that could benefit all of humanity. The applications for controlled cellular transformation are limitless medical treatments, enhanced military capabilities, space exploration adaptations. Where are the Brestons? Doctor. Warren's expression didn't change, but she paused just long enough to confirm my worst fears. The Breston family is safe and being well cared for while we study their recent transformation event. Their abilities manifested very suddenly, which makes them valuable for understanding the trigger mechanisms. I want to see them. That's not possible right now, but you'll be able to help us understand their condition better. Our tests show that your genetic markers are even stronger than theirs. With the right stimulation, we believe you could achieve controlled transformation much more easily. The door opened, and 2 technicians entered with equipment I didn't recognize. Medical devices mixed with restraint systems that looked like they belonged in a horror movie. I'm not volunteering for anything, I said, standing up quickly. Ranger Whitmore, you've been exposed to classified phenomena, and you carry genetic markers that make you a national security asset. Your cooperation isn't optional. The technicians moved to either side of me, and I realized that everything Mary Goines had warned me about was happening exactly as she'd predicted. These people weren't interested in understanding the Melungeon community or protecting anyone's rights. They wanted to turn human beings into laboratory specimens. That's when I felt it, the change Mary had told me was coming. It started as anger, pure and simple. Rage at being imprisoned, at being treated like a test subject, at watching my own government turn constitutional rights into classified exceptions. But the anger felt different than it ever had before. Stronger, more focused, and connected to physical sensations I'd never experienced. My hearing sharpened until I could detect conversations happening in other parts of the building. My sense of smell expanded until I could identify individual people by their scent signatures. And my vision changed until I could see details in the shadows that had been invisible moments before. Dr. Warren was watching me with clinical fascination. Extraordinary. You're undergoing physiological changes in response to perceived threat. Heart rate elevated, pupil dilation, increased muscle tension, and... She paused, consulting a handheld device. Neurological patterns consistent with pre-transformation states we've observed in other subjects. The technicians moved closer with their restraint equipment, and something inside me snapped. The transformation wasn't painful, exactly. It was like finally allowing my body to become what it had always wanted to be. My bones stretched and reformed, my muscles expanded and redistributed, and my senses exploded into a range of awareness I'd never imagined possible. When it was over, I was looking at Dr. Warren and her technicians from a perspective about 4 feet lower than before, through the golden eyes of a mountain cat that was stronger, faster, and more dangerous than any human in that room. Dr. Warren was taking notes frantically. Incredible. Complete cellular transformation in under 30 seconds. Subject retains apparent consciousness, and cognitive function in altered state. The technicians were backing toward the door, their equipment forgotten. One of them was reaching for what looked like a tranquilizer gun. I could have killed them all in seconds. The predator instincts that came with this form were overwhelming every movement. Every scent, every sound was being processed through a hunter's awareness that identified threats and calculated attack strategies automatically. Instead, I did something that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. I changed back. The return transformation was easier than the first change, like putting on familiar clothes after being dressed in something uncomfortable. Within moments, I was standing there in my human form, looking at three people who had just witnessed something their science could record but couldn't fully explain. "You can study me all you want," I said quietly, "but you'll never control me, and you'll never turn this gift into a weapon for hurting people." "Doctor." Warren was staring at me with a mixture of scientific excitement and genuine fear. "How did you control the transformation?" Other subjects require extensive conditioning and environmental manipulation to achieve voluntary shifts. "Because I finally understood what my grandmother was trying to tell me," I said. "This isn't a medical condition or a genetic mutation. It's a birthright, and you can't study birthright in a laboratory." The alarm started going off then, not because of me, but because someone was breaking into the facility from the outside. The mountain cats came first, moving through the facility's ventilation systems and security gaps like liquid shadow. Then the eagles, attacking the external communications equipment and power lines. Finally, the human form shapeshifters, armed with traditional weapons and generations of knowledge about moving unseen through hostile territory. Mary Goins appeared in the doorway of my cell, back in her human form, but with clothes and equipment that suggested she'd been planning this rescue for quite some time. "Your great-uncle Samuel always said you'd make the right choice when the time came," she said, tossing me my ranger uniform and gear. "But we weren't going to leave you here to prove it." The facility's security forces were completely overwhelmed. They'd trained for external attacks and internal containment breaches, but not for enemies who could change their fundamental nature at will. Shapeshifters in animal form moved through spaces too small for humans, attacked from angles that were impossible to defend against, and coordinated their assault with a level of communication that didn't rely on technology. Dr. Warren and her team were huddled in a corner of the room, realizing that their test subjects had just become their captors. "The Brestons?" I asked Mary as we moved through corridors filled with the sounds of systematic liberation. "Safe. Scared, but learning to control their abilities with help from people who actually understand what they're going through." She gestured toward the chaos around us. "This whole operation is being shut down, permanently. Too many of our people have been taken over the years. Too many families separated and studied like lab rats." We reached the main laboratory, where the Breston family was helping to destroy research equipment and confiscate files. They moved, with the fluid grace I was beginning to recognize as the mark of active shapeshifters, but their eyes held the warmth of people who had found their way home. "Mrs. Breston approached me with a smile that showed teeth that were slightly sharper than they used to be. "Ranger Whitmore, thank you for not giving up on us. Are you really okay? All of you?" "Better than okay," Mr. Breston answered. "For the first time in our lives, we understand what we are. Why we always felt different, why we never quite fit in anywhere else. Our children are learning to control abilities that would have terrified us a week ago." The Breston children were helping to carry boxes of research files toward the exit. They moved with the easy confidence of young people who had discovered they were capable of things they'd never imagined. Not better than human, just human, in a way that included possibilities most people never experienced. Mary touched my shoulder. "You have a choice to make, Joshua. You can come with us, back to the mountains, and learn what your grandmother never let herself learn. Or you can return to your old life and pretend none of this ever happened." I looked around the laboratory, at the evidence of decades of research conducted on people who had been imprisoned for the crime of being genetically unique. At Dr. Warren and her team, who saw human beings as collections of interesting problems to be solved. At the Breston family, who had found peace and identity in embracing what they truly were. What about my job, my responsibilities as a ranger? Samuel Collins appeared beside Mary, moving with the silent grace of someone who had been practicing shape-shifting for 70 years. "Boy, You think there ain't ranger work to be done in these mountains? You think our people don't need protection from folks who want to study us and cage us and turn us into weapons? He was right. The Cherokee National Forest was home to more than just ordinary of wildlife and historical sites. It was sanctuary for people whose very existence challenged everything mainstream society thought it knew about human nature. There's paperwork to be filed, I said finally. Reports to be written. This facility is going to disappear from the official records, but the people who authorized it are still out there. Someone needs to make sure this doesn't happen again. Mary nodded approvingly, spoken like a true ranger. Protect the territory, protect the people who belong there, and keep the balance between what's public knowledge and what needs to stay hidden. 6 months later, I submitted my final report on the Breaston family disappearance. According to the official record, they were found safe after becoming lost in a remote area of the Cherokee National Forest. They chose to relocate to a private community focused on traditional Appalachian lifestyles, and they declined further contact with outside authorities. The government research facility never existed, at least not in any paperwork that survived the bureaucratic housecleaning that followed. Dr. Warren and her team were reassigned to projects that didn't involve human subjects, and several high-ranking officials took early retirement for reasons that were never made public. I still work as a ranger in the Cherokee National Forest, but my territory has expanded considerably. I patrol areas that don't appear on public maps, protecting communities that maintain traditional ways of life, and ensuring that families with unusual genetic heritage can live in peace, without fear of persecution or scientific exploitation. My senses are sharper now. My physical capabilities are enhanced, and when the situation requires it, I can become something other than human. But mostly, I'm still just a forest ranger, doing work that matters in mountains that hold more secrets than most people will ever know. Sometimes, late at night, I hear howling in the distance, not coyotes or dogs, but voices singing in harmony. The sound of people who have found their way home, who have learned to embrace what they are instead of hiding from it. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the deepest parts of the forest, I add my voice to theirs. Because some gifts are meant to be shared, and some families are bigger than the ones you're born into. My grandmother chose to run from what she was becoming, and I understand why. The world wasn't ready for people like us. But the world is changing, and maybe, someday, it will be ready to know that human nature includes possibilities that science is only beginning to understand. Until then, I'll keep doing what rangers do, protecting the territory, protecting the people who belong there, and maintaining the balance between what the public needs to know and what they need to be protected from. The mountains keep their secrets well, and so do I. My name is Margaret Caldwell, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. People think that's long enough to see everything the mountains can throw at you. They're wrong. I work in Pisgah National Forest, up in the Grandfather Mountain area of North Carolina. It's beautiful country, old-growth forests that have stood for hundreds of years, rocky ridges that cut the sky like broken teeth, and streams so clear you can count the pebbles 20 feet down. Most days, I love my job. I track wildlife, manage the predator population, and keep hikers from doing stupid things that'll get them killed. I have a PhD in wildlife biology. Before I became a ranger, I spent 15 years studying large cats, cougars, mainly. The eastern cougar used to roam these mountains, but they've been extinct for decades. At least, that's what the textbooks say. I've always wondered if maybe, just maybe, a few survived in the deep wilderness where nobody goes. That wondering is what got me into trouble. It was March 1976, and winter was fighting spring for control of the mountains. Some days hit 60 degrees, and you could smell the earth waking up. Other days, ice formed on the water buckets, and your breath hung in the air like smoke. The animals were confused too, coming out of their winter dens, then hiding again when the cold snapped back. I was sitting in my cabin on Copper Ridge, writing up reports, when the call came in. Jim Bradley, who ran cattle on the land bordering the forest, sounded scared. "Margaret, you need to get down here. Something killed 3 of my steers last night." "Coyotes?" I asked, though I knew it wasn't likely. Coyotes don't usually take down healthy cattle. No, ma'am. This was something big, something that knew what it was doing. I drove down to Jim's ranch that afternoon. He met me at the fence line, his face gray under his hat. Jim had been ranching for 30 years. He'd seen bears, coyotes, even the occasional wild dog. Pack. This was different. The first steer lay in a small clearing about 50 yards from the fence. The kill was clean, throat torn out with surgical precision. But what bothered me was how the animal had been positioned. It was laid out neat and straight, like someone had arranged it for viewing. "You ever see anything like this?" Jim asked. I crouched down next to the carcass, studying the wounds. The claw marks were deep, made by something with retractable claws. Big ones. The bite pattern on the throat showed long canines, spaced wider than any coyote or dog. "Could be a bear," I said, but I didn't believe it. Bears are messy killers. This was precise. "Look at the tracks," Jim said. That's when things got strange. The tracks started normal enough. Big cat prints, probably 4 inches across. But 30 feet from the kill, they changed. The stride got longer and the prints looked different, almost like they were made by something walking on 2 legs instead of 4. "What do you make of that?" Jim asked. I stood up, brushing dirt off my knees. "I'll need to follow these tracks, see where they lead. Mind if I camp out here tonight?" Jim shook his head. "You can camp, but I wouldn't recommend it. The Cherokee used to say this area was cursed. They called it the hunting ground of the Wampus cat. I'd heard the stories. Every region has its legends, and the Wampus cat was ours. According to Cherokee folklore, a woman had been caught spying on sacred men's ceremonies. As punishment, the medicine man cursed her to become half cat, half human, forever hunting the mountains in a form that belonged to neither world." "Just old stories," I said. Jim looked at the dead steer, then back at me. "Maybe. But Margaret, I've lived here my whole life. Animals don't arrange their kills like that. And they sure don't leave tracks that change from 4 legs to 2. I set up my tent that evening near the tree line, close enough to the kill site to observe, but far enough to avoid contaminating any more evidence. The sun set early behind the ridges, and the temperature dropped fast. I made a small fire and heated up a can of beans, listening to the normal sounds of the forest settling in for the night. Except they weren't normal. Usually at dusk, you hear owls calling, small animals rustling through the leaves, maybe a coyote pack tuning up in the distance. That night, the forest was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when every living thing is hiding. Around midnight, I heard something moving through the trees. Slow, deliberate steps that circled my campsite just outside the firelight. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam through the darkness, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped. I sat by the fire until dawn, fighting the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. When the sun came up, I found fresh tracks around my camp. The same tracks I'd seen at the kill site, 4-legged changing to 2-legged, like something had been walking upright, studying me. That's when I knew Jim was right. This wasn't just an animal. The next morning, I followed the tracks up into the high country. The trail led through thick forest, over rocky outcroppings, and along stream beds where the prints disappeared in the water, only to pick up again on the far side. Whatever made them knew the territory better than any animal should. 3 miles up the ridge, I found the second kill site. This time it was a deer, a big buck that should have been able to outrun or outfight most predators. But like the steer, it had been killed cleanly and arranged carefully. The deer was positioned facing east, toward the rising sun, with its antlers pointing toward an old Cherokee ceremonial site I knew was hidden deeper in the forest. The tracks here told a different story. Instead of the mixed 4-leg, 2-leg pattern, these were clearly bipedal, human-sized, but with claw marks at the end of each toe print. Whatever had killed this deer had been walking upright like a person. I took photographs and made sketches, trying to document everything scientifically. But the longer I stared at those tracks, the more my skin crawled. They looked like footprints, but wrong. Too narrow, with the weight distributed differently than human feet. And those claws. My radio crackled. "Margaret, you copy?" It was Dave Chen, another ranger who worked the South District. "Go ahead, Dave. Got another call from a rancher down in Bear Creek. Lost 2 calves last night. Same type of kill you're dealing with up there." Bear Creek was 15 miles south of Copper Ridge. If the same predator was responsible, It was covering an impossible amount of territory in a single night. "I'll be down there this afternoon," I told him. But first, I wanted to follow these tracks to see where they led. The trail wound higher into the mountains, through areas where few people ever went. The forest got older and darker, with massive trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. My compass started acting strange, the needle spinning in slow circles instead of pointing north. I figured it was interference from iron ore deposits in the rocks. After 2 hours of hiking, the tracks led to a cave opening in a granite cliff face. The cave mouth was about 8 feet high and 6 feet wide, with scratch marks around the edges, like something with claws had been sharpening them on the stone. I called out, following standard procedure when investigating potential wildlife dens. "Hello, ranger coming in." My voice echoed back from deep inside the cave, but underneath the echo was something else. A sound like breathing, but slower and deeper than human lungs could manage. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the cave. The beam showed a tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. The walls were covered with more scratch marks, and the floor was littered with bones. Most were animal bones, deer, rabbit, squirrel. But some looked different, longer, thicker. 20 feet into the cave, I found something that made my blood freeze. Hanging from a ledge in the rock wall was a collection of objects. A child's doll, faded and torn. A woman's bracelet, tarnished with age. A man's wallet, the leather cracked and brittle. And dozens of other personal items, all old, all arranged with the same careful precision I'd seen at the kill sites. The breathing sound came again, closer this time. I backed toward the cave entrance, keeping my light trained on the tunnel ahead. That's when I saw the eyes. Yellow-green, reflecting my flashlight beam from about 50 feet deeper in the cave. They were too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal, and they watched me with an intelligence that made my hands shake. "Easy?" I whispered, not sure if I was talking to whatever was in there or to myself. The eyes blinked once, slowly, then disappeared. A few seconds later, I heard movement, something large shifting position in the darkness. Then silence. I made it back to my truck in record time and drove straight to Bear Creek. Dave was waiting for me at the ranch, standing over 2 dead calves that had been killed and arranged exactly like the other animals. The rancher, an old man named Pete Whitman, looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Been losing stock for 3 weeks now," Pete told us. "Always the same, clean kills, animals laid out neat as you please. But last night was different." "How so?" Dave asked. Pete pointed toward his farmhouse. "My dog Charlie started barking around midnight. I looked out the window and saw something standing in my pasture. Looked like a woman at first, but she was too tall. And she moved wrong, like she was walking on cat feet." "Could you see her clearly?" I asked. "Clear enough. She had long dark hair and was wearing some kind of dress or robe. But when she turned toward the house," Pete shook his head. "Her face wasn't right. Eyes too big, mouth too wide, and when she smiled, I saw teeth like a cat's." Dave and I exchanged looks. Pete was known for being practical and level-headed. If he said he saw something, he saw something. "What happened then?" I asked. She looked right at me through the window, looked at me and smiled. Then she dropped down on all fours and ran off into the woods faster than anything I've ever seen move. That night, Dave and I set up a surveillance post overlooking the pasture. We had night vision equipment, cameras, and enough coffee to stay awake until dawn. Around 2 a.m., the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the space of 5 minutes. Our breath started fogging, and frost formed on the metal parts of our equipment. "You feel that?" Dave whispered. Before I could answer, our night vision scopes went haywire. The screens filled with static, then cleared to show a heat signature moving across the pasture. But the signature was wrong. Too hot and too large, shaped like a human but moving like an animal. Then, the cameras stopped working. We sat in the dark, listening to the sound of something moving through the pasture. Slow, deliberate footsteps that seemed to be circling the farmhouse. Every few minutes, the footsteps would stop, and we'd hear a sound like sniffing, something testing the air. When dawn came, we found fresh tracks around the house. The same tracks I'd been following for days. Human feet with claws, sometimes 2-legged, sometimes 4. But this time, there was something new. Pressed into the mud by the kitchen window was a perfect handprint. Human-sized, but with long claw marks extending from each finger. The print was still warm. Word spread fast through the mountain communities. 3 ranches had lost livestock, all to the same impossible predator. People started calling it the Wampus cat, half joking until they saw the evidence. Then they stopped joking. I spent the next week documenting every kill site, every track, every piece of physical evidence. My scientific training told me there had to be a rational explanation. Large cat, maybe an escaped exotic pet, or a person wearing some kind of clawed footwear, though that didn't explain the heat signature or the supernatural speed. But deep down, I was starting to believe what the Cherokee elders had always said. Something unnatural lived in these mountains. The breakthrough came when I met Joseph Crowfeather, a Cherokee elder who'd grown up on stories about the Wampus cat. He found me at the ranger station on a Thursday morning, carrying a bundle wrapped in deerskin. "You're the one tracking the cursed woman," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm tracking a predator that's killing livestock," I replied. Joseph smiled. He was maybe 70 years old, with silver hair and long braids and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Same thing. You want to understand what you're hunting? You need to know the story." He unwrapped the deerskin bundle and pulled out an old photograph. The picture was faded and cracked, but it clearly showed a young Cherokee woman in traditional dress. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and intelligent eyes. Her name was Adsila, Joseph said, means blossom in our language. This picture was taken in 1897, just before she disappeared. Disappeared how? She was caught spying on the sacred men's ceremonies. Women weren't allowed to witness certain rituals. It was forbidden, dangerous to the spiritual balance. When the medicine man found her hiding in the woods, watching secrets she shouldn't see, he was furious. Joseph put the photograph on my desk. The curse was specific. She would become neither fully human nor fully animal, but something in between. Forever hungry, forever hunting, forever alone. She would remember her human life, but be driven by animal instincts she couldn't control. "That's just a story," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Is it? You've seen the evidence. Human intelligence planning the kills, animal strength carrying them out. Tracks that change from 2 legs to 4. A creature that understands human behavior but follows predator instincts." I stared at the photograph. The woman in the picture looked sad, like she knew what was coming. "If this is true," I said slowly, "then what we're dealing with isn't just a dangerous animal. It's a person trapped in a nightmare that's lasted almost 80 years. Joseph nodded. "And getting stronger. The longer the curse runs, the more the animal side takes control. She's losing her humanity bit by bit." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Adsila, imagining what it would be like to be trapped between 2 forms, 2 natures. To remember being human, but be driven by instincts you couldn't understand or control. Around 3 a.m., I heard scratching at my cabin door. I grabbed my flashlight and service pistol, moving quietly to the window. In the moonlight, I could see a figure crouched on my front porch. It looked like a woman, but she was positioned wrong, balanced on the balls of her feet like a cat ready to spring. She was scratching symbols into my door with her fingernails. No, not fingernails, claws. Long, curved claws that left deep gouges in the wood. I watched through the window as she worked. Her movements were precise, deliberate, almost artistic. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and looked directly at my window. Even in the moonlight, I could see her eyes glowing with that yellow-green light. She smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too long. Then she dropped to all 4s and vanished into the darkness faster than my eye could follow. When morning came, I examined the symbols she'd carved. They weren't random scratches, they were Cherokee. Pictographs, old ones that told a story. Joseph translated them for me later that day. "She's warning you," he said. "The symbols say hunter becomes hunted, and one who seeks becomes one who is found." Meaning what? You've been tracking her for 2 weeks, now she's tracking you. The attacks escalated after that. Instead of killing livestock every few days, the Wampus cat started hunting every night. But the kills changed. Instead of the careful, ritualistic arrangements, the animals were torn apart with savage fury. She was losing control, giving in more and more to the animal side of her nature. Dave and I started patrolling together, neither of us willing to go into the deep woods alone. We carried heavy flashlights, radios that worked sporadically in the mountains, and weapons that we hoped we wouldn't need to use. On Saturday night, we were checking a report of strange sounds near Copper Creek when we heard screaming. The sound came from deeper in the forest, human screams mixed with something else, a yowling, cat-like cry that raised the hair on the back of my neck. We ran toward the sound, our flashlight beams dancing through the trees. We found Tom Brennan, a hiker who'd been camping illegally in the closed section of the forest. He was backed up against a massive oak tree, staring at something we couldn't see. His clothes were torn, and he had scratch marks across his chest, but he was alive. "Where is it?" Dave shouted. Tom pointed with a shaking hand toward a rocky outcropping about 50 feet away. "Up there! She's up there watching us!" Our light swept the rocks but found nothing. Then Dave's beam caught a flash of movement, something large dropping from the rocks to disappear into the undergrowth. We got Tom to safety and called for a medical helicopter to evacuate him. While we waited, he told us what had happened. "I was sleeping in my tent when something started circling the campsite. I could hear it breathing, hear claws clicking on the rocks. Then the tent started shaking." "What did you see when you got out?" I asked. "A woman. At least, she started as a woman. Long, dark hair, pale skin, wearing some kind of torn dress. But as I watched, she changed. Her face got longer, her teeth got bigger, her hands turned into claws." Tom grabbed my arm. The worst part was her eyes. They were human eyes, like she was still a person inside. She looked at me, and I could see she was as scared as I was. Like she didn't want to be doing what she was doing. The helicopter took Tom to the hospital in Asheville. Dave and I were left alone in the forest with something that was becoming more dangerous every day. "We need help," Dave said. "This is beyond what 2 rangers can handle." I knew he was right, but I also knew that bringing in a hunting party or wildlife control team would only make things worse. They'd try to kill the Wampus cat, not understanding that she was as much victim as predator. "Give me 1 more week," I said. "Let me try to find another solution." Dave looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was, but I couldn't stop thinking about Joseph's words, about a woman trapped for 80 years in a form she never chose. There had to be another way. The next few days passed in a blur of research and planning. I spent hours with Joseph, learning everything I could about the original curse and Cherokee's spiritual traditions. He taught me about the ceremonial sites scattered through the mountains, places where the barrier between the physical and spiritual worlds was thin. "The curse was cast at the sacred grove on Copper Ridge," Joseph explained. "That's where it's strongest, where her human spirit and animal nature are most in conflict. If there's a way to break the curse, it would have to happen there." "How do we break it?" Joseph was quiet for a long time. "The old stories say the only way to free a cursed spirit is through willing sacrifice. Someone has to take her place, accept the burden of the curse to set her free." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Take her place? Become like her? Not become like her, become her. The curse doesn't create multiple victims, it transfers from one to another. That night, I made my decision. Right or wrong, I couldn't stand by and watch Adsila lose more of her humanity. And I couldn't let innocent people die because I was too afraid to act. I packed light, water, basic supplies, and Joseph's bundle of ceremonial items he'd insisted I take. I left a letter explaining my plan at the ranger station, though I doubted anyone would believe it. The hike to the sacred grove took most of the night. I followed animal trails and dry creek beds, moving as quietly as I could through the ancient forest. The trees seemed to watch my progress, and more than once, I heard something large moving through the brush nearby. She was following me. I could feel her presence like a weight on my shoulders. The sacred grove sat in a natural clearing on the highest point of Copper Ridge. Ancient oaks formed a perfect circle around a flat area where Cherokee ceremonies had been held for generations. Even in the darkness, the place felt different, charged with spiritual energy that made my skin tingle. I set up Joseph's ceremonial items in the center of the grove and waited. I didn't wait long. She emerged from the tree line just as the first light of dawn touched the sky. In the gray morning light, I could see her clearly for the first time. Adsila was still beautiful, but in a terrible way. Her human features were stretched and sharpened, cheekbones too high, jaw too long, eyes too large and bright. Her hair hung to her waist in tangled black waves, and her skin was pale as moonlight. She wore the remnants of a traditional dress, now torn and stained with years of hunting. But it was her hands that showed the curse most clearly. They were still recognizably human, but her fingers had stretched and her nails had become claws as long as my thumb. When she moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator. But her posture spoke of human intelligence and awareness. She stopped at the edge of the grove, studying me. When she spoke, her voice was rusty from disuse but unmistakably human. "Why are you here?" "To help you," I said. She laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "No one can help me. I've been alone too long. The hunger is too strong. Joseph told me about the curse, about what happened to you." Her expression changed, becoming more human for a moment. "Joseph, is he still alive?" "Yes, he remembers you. He wants to help." Tears ran down her cheeks, but her claws dug furrows in the earth. "I've forgotten so much. Sometimes I remember being human, but then the hunger takes over, and She gestured helplessly at her transformed hands. "It doesn't have to be permanent. The curse can be broken. Only by sacrifice. Someone would have to take my place, and I won't let that happen. I've killed enough innocents." I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible. What if the sacrifice was willing? What if someone chose to help you? Her eyes went wide. "No, you don't understand what you're offering. The curse isn't just about changing form. It's about losing yourself piece by piece. In 20 years, you wouldn't remember being human. In 50 years, you wouldn't remember your name. You'd just be a hungry thing in the woods, killing because you can't stop yourself. But you'd be free. You could rest." Adsila shook her head violently. "I won't be responsible for someone else's suffering." That's when I heard the helicopters. Dave had found my letter. He'd brought a wildlife control team, men with tranquilizer guns and capture equipment. The helicopters circled the grove, and I could hear vehicles approaching through the forest. Adsila's transformation was immediate and terrifying. Her human features sharpened into something purely predatory. Her canine teeth extended into fangs and her claws grew longer. She dropped into a crouch, snarling at the approaching sounds. "They want to capture you," I said. "Put you in a cage or worse." She looked at me with eyes that were more animal than human now. "Then I'll fight." "You don't have to. There's another way." The first of the wildlife control team broke through the tree line, men in protective gear carrying tranquilizer rifles. They saw Adsila and shouted to each other, raising their weapons. I stepped between them and her. "Wait, don't shoot." "Get out of the way, Margaret," Dave yelled from behind the team. "That thing is dangerous." "She's not a thing, she's a person." Tilla was fully transformed now, more cat than human. But she wasn't attacking. She was looking at me with an expression of gratitude and terrible sadness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice distorted by her changed throat, "for seeing me as human." The tranquilizer guns fired. I don't know if it was the spiritual energy of the grove or Adsila's supernatural nature, but the darts had no effect. She moved like liquid shadow, avoiding the capture team and disappearing into the forest faster than their eyes could follow. The search went on for 3 days. They found tracks, scratch marks, signs of her passage, but never caught sight of her again. Eventually, the wildlife control team gave up and went home. Dave found me on the 4th day, sitting by the sacred grove. I'd been waiting, hoping she would come back. "She's gone, isn't she?" he said. "I think so. I think she went deep into the wilderness, away from people. Maybe that's for the best." I nodded, but I felt like I'd failed her. I'd offered to help and ended up making things worse. That night, I found a package on my cabin doorstep. Inside was the old photograph Joseph had shown me, along with a note written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for remembering I was human. I'm going where I can't hurt anyone else. The hunger is too strong now, but I'll fight it as long as I can. Don't blame yourself. Some curses can't be broken, only endured." The livestock attacks stopped after that. For months there were no signs of the Wampus cat anywhere in the region. The ranchers went back to their normal routines, and the tourist season proceeded without incident. But I knew she was still out there. Sometimes, hiking in the deep wilderness, I'd find signs of her presence. A deer kill that was too clean, too precise for any normal predator. Claw marks on trees at heights no animal could reach. And once, camping near a remote stream, I woke to find fresh footprints around my tent, the familiar pattern of human feet with claws. Joseph and I became close friends over the following months. He taught me more about Cherokee traditions and the spiritual ecology of the mountains. Through him, I learned that the Wampus Cat was just one of many supernatural guardians that protected sacred sites throughout Appalachian country. She's become something different than what the curse intended, Joseph explained one evening as we sat by his fire. The hunger is still there, but she's learned to control it. She hunts animals now instead of threatening humans. Is that enough? Is she finding peace? For his life? Joseph stirred the fire with a long stick, sending sparks up into the night sky. Peace? No. But purpose? Maybe. She's become a guardian of the deep wilderness, keeping people away from places they shouldn't go. 6 months after the confrontation at the sacred grove, I received a promotion offer, a position at Yellowstone that would advance my career significantly. I turned it down. These mountains had become my responsibility in ways that went beyond any job description. Dave thought I was crazy for staying. This place has changed you, Margaret. You're different since all this happened. He was right. I could sense things now that I'd never noticed before. The spiritual energy that flowed through certain places. The presence of things that existed just outside normal perception. Sometimes, late at night, I dreamed of running through the forest on 4 legs, seeing through eyes that weren't entirely human. The dreams didn't frighten me. They felt like messages, glimpses of a consciousness that was slowly finding balance between human intelligence and animal instinct. I established new protocols for the deep wilderness areas, restricting access to the most spiritually sensitive sites. When tourists complained about the regulations, I explained them as wildlife protection measures. It wasn't entirely a lie. On the anniversary of our encounter at the sacred grove, I hiked back to Copper Ridge. I left a small offering of tobacco and sage, as Joseph had taught me, and sat quietly in the morning light. I didn't see her, but I felt her presence nearby. Watching, waiting, still fighting the hunger, still protecting the balance between worlds that most people never even knew existed. As I prepared to leave, I found something carved into the bark of an ancient oak at the edge of the grove. Fresh Cherokee symbols that spelled out a single word, grateful. The mountain wilderness keeps its secrets well. Hikers still report strange sounds and unexplained sightings in the remote areas, but the attacks on humans have stopped. Occasionally, a hunter or camper will find evidence of something large and intelligent moving through the deepest forests, but they're usually content to dismiss it as an unusually large bear or wildcat. I know better. Somewhere in the trackless wilderness of Copper Ridge, Adsila continues her eternal hunt. No longer fully human, never entirely animal, but something new, a guardian spirit born from tragedy and sustained by purpose. The curse couldn't be broken, but it was transformed. Sometimes that's the best any of us can hope for. I still patrol these mountains, still respond to reports of unusual predator activity. But now I understand that my job isn't just about protecting people from the wilderness. It's about protecting the wilderness from people and ensuring that ancient forces continue to keep their appointed watches. On quiet nights, when the wind moves through the old-growth forests and the moon is dark, I sometimes hear a sound like distant singing carried on the mountain air. It might be wind through the trees, or the call of some night bird I can't identify. But I choose to believe it's Adsila, singing the old songs she remembers from when she was human, holding on to the last pieces of who she used to be while fulfilling the purpose she never chose but has learned to accept. The mountains keep their secrets, and some curses become blessings in ways we never expect. My name is Samuel Hendricks, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me until September of 1999, when something impossible started happening at the land between the lakes. Most people don't know that my beat includes the old Bell family farm site. It's tucked away in a corner of the park where the Tennessee River bends through Kentucky. The government bought the land in the 1960 seconds and turned it into a historical preserve. Nothing much to see now, except some old foundation stones and a small cemetery with weathered headstones. But locals still tell stories about this place. Stories about the Bell Witch. According to the tales, back in 1817, Something evil started tormenting the Bell family. It threw rocks, pulled hair, and spoke in voices that came from thin air. The thing called itself Kate, and it tormented them for 4 years before vanishing. Andrew Jackson himself supposedly came to investigate and left scared. I always figured it was just old frontier nonsense. Isolated farm families, long dark winters, too much moonshine, people's minds play tricks. I've got a master's degree in American history, and I've read every account. Mass hysteria, that's all it was. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the only park ranger in America who was actually related to the family he was protecting. My great-great-grandmother was a Bell, though I didn't advertise that fact. Last thing I needed was ghost hunters bothering me about family connections. September had been brutal that year. Day after day of 90-degree heat and humidity thick enough to swim through. The Weather Service kept promising storms that never came. Everything felt wrong, the air too still, the animals too quiet. Even the insects seemed on edge. I was doing my evening patrol on September 15th when I found the damage. Someone had gotten into the Bell Cemetery and trashed it. Headstones knocked over, graves dug up, trash scattered everywhere. 20 years of keeping vandals away from this place, and someone had finally gotten through. I called it in and started documenting the scene with my camera. Standard procedure, photograph everything before you touch anything. But as I worked, something bothered me. The damage looked random, but it wasn't. Whoever did this knew exactly which graves belonged to the original Bell family. They'd targeted those specific stones while leaving the newer burials alone. By the time I finished the initial documentation, the sun had set. I decided to start cleanup in the morning when I'd have better light. As I walked back to my truck, I heard something that made me stop. A woman's voice, clear as day, calling my name, Samuel. I turned around, flashlight in hand, scanning the cemetery. Nobody there. The voice had come from the direction of the Bell family plot, but my light showed only knocked-over headstones and disturbed earth. "Hello?" I called out. "This is a restricted area. You need to leave." Silence. Even the night insects had gone quiet. I checked my radio. Static. Cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual in this part of the valley. I was on my own until morning. The smart thing would have been to leave and come back with backup, but I'd been protecting this place for 2 decades. Some punk kids weren't going to scare me off with voice tricks and hidden speakers. I set up my camping chair near the truck and settled in for a long night. Whatever was going on, I was going to get to the bottom of it. That's when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the space of a minute. I've spent enough time outdoors to know when weather changes naturally and when something else is happening. This wasn't natural. The cold came from the ground up, like the earth itself was exhaling ice. My breath started fogging, even though it had been 90 degrees an hour earlier. The thermometer in my truck read 45 degrees. In September, in Tennessee, I grabbed my heavy jacket from the truck and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Cold fronts don't work that way. They don't drop straight down in a perfect circle around a cemetery while leaving the rest of the area untouched. My radio crackled to life. "Samuel, can you hear me?" The voice was female, older, with an accent I couldn't place. Not quite southern, but something from an earlier time. "This is Ranger Hendricks. Identify yourself and state your location." "Oh, I'm right here, Samuel. I've been waiting for you." I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The cemetery looked exactly the same: damaged headstones, scattered debris, no sign of another person. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on federal property. Show yourself, and we can discuss this calmly." Laughter came through the radio. Not malicious, just amused. "Federal property? This land belonged to my family before there was a federal government, boy." Something cold touched the back of my neck. Not wind, something that felt like fingers. I spun around again, heart hammering. Nothing. But now I could smell something that didn't belong. Lavender and old wood, like opening a trunk that had been closed for decades. "Who are you?" I asked the radio. "You know who I am, Samuel Hendricks. Your great-great-grandmother told you the stories." Catherine Batts, though most folks called me Kate. My blood went cold. Kate Batts was the woman the Bell family had accused of being a witch. According to the stories, she'd cursed them from beyond the grave. "The Bell Witch?" I whispered. "Such an ugly name," the voice said. "But I suppose it serves its purpose." I tried to think rationally. Someone was playing an elaborate prank. They'd hidden speakers around the cemetery, set up some kind of cooling system, maybe used dry ice to create the fog that was now rising from the disturbed graves. Very clever, I said aloud. Good special effects, but you're still trespassing, and vandalism is a federal crime. The laughter came again, but this time not from the radio. It came from everywhere at once, the trees, the headstones, the ground itself. Samuel, look at the cemetery. I turned my flashlight back to the Bell family plot and nearly dropped it. Every headstone had been put back upright. The graves were filled in and neat. The trash was gone. The entire cemetery looked exactly like it had that morning before the vandalism. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. I'd been there for maybe 2 hours, and I hadn't taken my eyes off the place for more than a few minutes at a time. How did you? I started to ask. I protect what's mine, the voice said. And this place has been mine for a very long time. I walked slowly through the cemetery, checking each repaired headstone. The work was perfect. More than perfect, it was like the damage had never happened. Even the carved letters looked crisp and new. This is impossible, I said. Is it? Or are you just too stubborn to accept what you're seeing? I photographed everything, though I wasn't sure what the pictures would show. My camera's flash seemed dimmer than usual, and the shadows looked wrong. Too deep, too angular, like they were cast by a light source that wasn't there. What do you want? I asked. The same thing I've always wanted, to be left in peace, to protect my family's honor, and to make sure the truth isn't forgotten. Your family? The Bell Witch was supposed to be the spirit of Kate Batts. She wasn't family. Oh, Samuel, you really don't know the whole story, do you? The cold intensified. Frost started forming on the headstones, which should have been impossible given the humidity. My breath came out in thick clouds. John Bell accused me of witchcraft because I wouldn't sell him my land, the voice continued. He spread lies about me until the whole community turned against me. When I died, he thought he'd won. But death isn't the end of justice, Samuel. Sometimes it's just the beginning. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned and saw a figure standing between two headstones, a woman in a long dress that looked like it belonged in the 1800s. She was there for just a second, then gone. Did you see her? The voice asked. See who? Don't lie to me, boy. You saw her plain as day. Kate Batts, standing right where they buried her. My hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. I'd been a skeptic my whole life. I believed in facts, evidence, rational explanations. But what I was experiencing couldn't be explained rationally. This isn't real, I said. People don't come back from the dead, don't they? Then explain what happened to your cemetery. Explain the cold. Explain my voice coming through your radio when there's no signal in this valley. I couldn't. 20 years of law enforcement training, a college degree, and a lifetime of common sense, and I couldn't explain a single thing that had happened since sunset. The vandals, I said, grasping for something logical. Maybe they came back and fixed. Samuel. The voice was gentle now, almost motherly. When you were 7 years old, your grandmother told you a story about why your family never talks about the Bell side. Do you remember? I did remember. Grandma had sworn me to secrecy, made me promise never to tell anyone. She'd said the Bell family was cursed, that something had followed them for generations, protecting them from some people and punishing others. She told you about Kate, the voice continued. How Kate wasn't the monster the stories made her out to be. How she was trying to protect the family, not hurt them. That's just family folklore, I said. Every family has stories. Is it? Then why are you here, Samuel? Why did you become the protector of this place? Why do you feel responsible for keeping the truth alive? I didn't have an answer for that. I'd always felt drawn to this assignment, like I belonged here, like it was my duty. The temperature dropped again. This time, ice started forming on my jacket. Someone's coming, the voice said. Someone who wants to hurt this place. You need to decide, Samuel. Are you going to help me protect it, or are you going to let them destroy everything we've worked to preserve? Who's coming? But the voice was gone. The cold lifted, as suddenly as it had arrived. My thermometer shot back up to 85 degrees in a matter of seconds. I was alone in the cemetery with my thoughts, and a growing certainty that my nice, rational world was about to get turned upside down. In the distance, I could hear vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, getting closer. 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking area at 2 a.m. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of convoy that meant serious federal business. I stayed in the shadows near the cemetery and watched 6 people in dark suits climb out. They moved with military precision, setting up equipment I didn't recognize. The lead figure approached my truck with a confident stride. Tall, thin, wearing glasses that reflected my flashlight beam. Ranger Hendricks, Agent Sarah Chen, Department of Interior, Office of Special Investigations. We need to talk. Office of Special Investigations? In 20 years of Park Service, I'd never heard of that division. It's pretty late for a federal inspection, I said, walking out to meet them. What's this about? We received reports of unusual electromagnetic activity in this area. Multiple agencies detected anomalous readings originating from these coordinates. She gestured toward the cemetery. We need to secure the site and conduct measurements. I watched her team setting up what looked like scientific equipment, digital sensors, cameras with special lenses, devices that hummed and blinked with colored lights. Electromagnetic activity? From a cemetery? Natural phenomena can create unusual readings, Agent Chen said smoothly. Underground mineral deposits, water table fluctuations, that sort of thing. We just need to rule out environmental hazards. It sounded reasonable, professional. Exactly the kind of explanation I would have accepted that morning. But something felt wrong about these people. They moved too efficiently, knew exactly where to place their equipment, acted like they'd done this before. Have you experienced anything unusual tonight? Chen asked. Temperature changes, equipment malfunctions, unusual sounds? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, the voice, the cold, the cemetery repairing itself. But another part, a part that had been listening to grandmother's stories for 40 years, warned me to stay quiet. Nothing unusual, I lied. She studied my face for a long moment. Ranger Hendricks, it's important that you tell us about any anomalous experiences. For your own safety and the safety of others. Just a normal patrol, I repeated. One of her technicians called out from near the Bell family plot. Agent Chen, you need to see this. We walked over to where the man was kneeling next to a device that looked like a cross between a metal detector and a computer. Numbers were scrolling across its screen too fast to read. Massive electromagnetic disturbance, he said, centered on this specific gravesite. The readings are off the charts. Chen crouched down and examined the readout. How long has this been active? Based on the residual patterns, I'd say it started approximately 4 hours ago. Whatever happened here was significant. 4 hours ago, right around the time I discovered the vandalism. Ranger Hendricks, Chen said, standing up. I'm going to ask you one more time. Have you experienced anything unusual? Before I could answer, all their equipment started going crazy. Lights flashed, alarms beeped, and the screens filled with static. Then, clear as day, a woman's voice came through their speakers. Get away from my family's grave. The technicians looked at each other with expressions I couldn't read. Fear? Excitement? They'd heard that voice before. Kate, Agent Chen said quietly, we're not here to disturb your rest. We just need to conduct some tests. Kate? She knew about Kate? The voice came again, louder this time. Tests? You want to cage me like a laboratory animal? Study me like a specimen? I think not. The temperature plummeted. Ice formed on the equipment so fast that several devices cracked and went dead. The remaining screens showed impossible readings, electromagnetic pulses stronger than lightning, temperature variations that shouldn't exist, gravitational anomalies that defied physics. Samuel, the voice said. And suddenly I could see her, Kate Batts, standing 10 feet away in her old-fashioned dress, looking as solid and real as anyone else present. Tell them to leave. Now. Agent Chen saw her too. I could tell by the way her hand moved instinctively toward her weapon. Ma'am, Chen said formally, I'm Agent Chen with the federal government. We have authorization to investigate this site. Kate laughed, and the sound made the remaining equipment spark and smoke. Authorization? From whom? I was here before your government existed, child. This land has been under my protection for over a century. We know who you are, Chen said. We've been monitoring supernatural entities like yourself for decades. We're not here to harm you. We just want to understand. Understand? Kate's form flickered, becoming more translucent, but somehow more menacing. You want to understand how to control me, how to weaponize me, how to use my abilities for your government's purposes. The wind picked up from nowhere, whipping through the people, cemetery, with enough force to knock over the remaining equipment. The temperature kept dropping until our breath came out in thick clouds. Samuel, Kate said, turning to me. These people have been hunting spirits like me for 50 years. They capture us, experiment on us, try to turn us into tools. That's why the vandalism happened tonight. They sent those men to disturb my rest, to force me to manifest so they could track me. I looked at Agent Chen, whose professional composure was cracking. Is that true? Ranger Hendricks, you need to understand. Is it true? I demanded. Chen sighed. Supernatural entities pose potential national security risks. Our job is to assess and contain those risks. Contain, Kate said. Such a nice word for imprisonment. The wind intensified. Trees creaked and swayed. In the distance, I could hear something that sounded like voices, multiple voices, all talking at once in languages I didn't recognize. Samuel, Kate said, you have a choice to make. You can help these people capture me, or you can help me protect this place. But you can't do both. Agent Chen stepped closer to me. Ranger Hendricks, this entity is dangerous. It's manipulating you, using your family connection to gain your sympathy. We have procedures for dealing with these situations. Procedures? Kate's voice rose to a shriek that made everyone cover their ears. You mean like the procedures you used on the spirit in Virginia? The one you tortured until it went insane? Or the procedures you used on the ghost ship in Massachusetts before you destroyed it completely? The other voices were getting louder. I realized they were coming from the cemetery itself. Other spirits, other ghosts that Kate was somehow calling up. You're not the only one they've hunted, Samuel, Kate said. But I'm the first one who's fought back successfully. That's why they want me so badly. Agent Chen was speaking rapidly into a radio. Base, this is Chen. Situation is escalating. Request immediate backup and containment team. No, I said, stepping between Chen and the cemetery. You're not taking her. Ranger Hendricks, you don't understand what you're dealing with. I understand perfectly. You lied to me. You've been hunting my ancestor like an animal, and you think I'm going to help you cage her? Kate smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked truly happy. Thank you, Samuel. I knew I could count on family. The other spirits materialized around us, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Soldiers from different wars, pioneers, Native Americans, children, all of them looking at Agent Chen and her team with expressions of pure hatred. You've awakened more than you bargained for, Kate said. Every spirit you've captured, every ghost you've tortured, every supernatural entity you've destroyed, they all have friends, family, connections. And we've all been waiting for someone to stand up to you. Chen and her team were backing toward their vehicles, but the spirits had surrounded them. There was nowhere to run. Samuel, Chen said desperately, help us. If you let her do this, you'll be responsible for what happens next. I looked at Kate, then at the federal agents, then at the growing crowd of supernatural entities filling the cemetery. What happens next is justice, I said. The spirits didn't attack the federal agents. They didn't need to. The temperature dropped so low that ice began forming on the SUV's windows. The remaining electronic equipment sparked and died. And from somewhere beneath the ground came a sound like distant thunder, deep, rhythmic, getting stronger. What is that? Agent Chen asked, her professional composure finally cracking completely. Kate smiled. That's the sound of 200 years of anger waking up. The ground began to tremble. Not an earthquake, something else. Something that felt purposeful, like the earth itself was taking sides. Samuel, Kate said, it's time you learned the whole truth. About your family, about me, about why this place is so important. The world around us shimmered, and suddenly I wasn't standing in a modern cemetery anymore. I was in a farmyard in 1820, watching a scene play out like a movie. John Bell stood arguing with a woman I recognized as Kate Batts. She was alive here, maybe 40 years old, dressed in simple frontier clothing. But her eyes were fierce, defiant. You'll sell me that land at a fair price, Kate, or I'll make sure no one in this community will do business with you. That land has been in my family for 3 generations, John Bell. I'm not selling it to you at any price. Then you'll regret it, mark my words. The scene shifted. Now I saw Kate alone in her cabin, sick and dying. But Bell's campaign against her had worked. No one would bring her food or medicine. No one would help her. The community had turned against her because of his lies about witchcraft. She died alone, Kate's voice said in my ear, abandoned by everyone she'd trusted, destroyed by one man's greed. But death doesn't end in justice, Samuel. Sometimes it's the only way to achieve it. The scene changed again. Now I saw the Bell family being tormented by an invisible force. Rocks thrown by unseen hands, voices speaking from empty air, physical attacks that left no trace of an attacker. I tried to make him confess, Kate said. Tried to make him tell the truth about what he'd done to me. But he was too proud, too stubborn. So I punished his whole family until he died of shame and fear. You terrorized innocent people, I said. Did I? Look closer. I watched more carefully this time. The supernatural attacks weren't random. The invisible force never hurt the women or children seriously. It focused its fury on John Bell himself, driving him to madness and eventually to death. The others were frightened but not harmed. I protected them the only way I knew how, Kate said, by removing the source of evil from their lives. The vision faded, and I was back in the modern cemetery. Agent Chen and her team were huddled near their vehicles while hundreds of spirits surrounded them. Your great-great-grandmother was John Bell's daughter, Kate continued. She knew the truth, that her father had murdered an innocent woman through lies and persecution. She tried to make amends by keeping my story alive, by teaching her children to respect this place. And now, I asked, now these people want to do to me what John Bell did. Cage me, control me, use me for their own purposes. They've been hunting supernatural entities for decades, Samuel. Capturing them, experimenting on them, turning them into weapons. Agent Chen had apparently decided diplomacy was worth trying again. The Office of Special Investigations protects America from supernatural threats, she called out. Entities like her have caused civilian casualties, property damage. Lies, Kate said, just like John Bell's lies. Samuel, ask her about Project Phantom. Ask her about the spirit they captured in Ohio and drove insane trying to turn it into an assassin. Ask her about the ghost ship they destroyed because it wouldn't cooperate with their experiments. I turned to Chen. Is she telling the truth? Chen hesitated. Our mandate is to protect American interests from supernatural threats. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. That's not an answer. Some entities are hostile to human life. They need to be contained. And the ones that aren't hostile? What happens to them? Another hesitation. They're studied. We need to understand their capabilities. You torture them, Kate interrupted. You imprison them in laboratories and torment them until they either cooperate or go insane. Just like John Bell tortured me with isolation and lies. The thunder from underground was getting louder. Cracks appeared in the frozen ground around the cemetery. Samuel, Agent Chen said urgently, you need to stop this. If she continues to escalate, people will die. Is that what you want? I looked around at the supernatural army Kate had assembled. Spirits from every era of American history, all of them staring at the federal agents with expressions of barely contained rage. What do you want from me? I asked Kate. I want you to choose, she said. Stand with your family and help me protect this place from people who would exploit it, or stand with them and help them cage me like an animal. And if I choose you, then this place becomes truly protected. No more government experiments. No more ghost hunters trying to exploit my story. No more vandals disturbing my family's rest. Just peace and truth and justice. And if I choose them, Kate's expression hardened, then you're no descendant of mine. And I'll defend myself against you, just like I defended myself against John Bell. The spirits pressed closer to Agent Chen's team. Ice crystals formed in the air around them. The temperature was so low now that their weapons were probably frozen solid. Samuel, Chen said desperately, whatever she's promised you, it's a lie. Supernatural entities can't be trusted. They're not human anymore. They don't think like we do. Don't I? Kate asked. I protected my family for 200 years. I've kept this place safe from exploitation and commercialization. I've preserved the truth when everyone else wanted to turn it into entertainment. How is that inhuman? She was right. Everything she'd done had been to protect something she loved from people who wanted to exploit it. I choose family, I said. Kate smiled. Agent Chen looked stricken. You're making a mistake, Chen said. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Kate raised her hand, and the supernatural army began to advance on the federal agents. Wait, I said, don't hurt them, just make them leave. Kate paused. You're showing them mercy they wouldn't show me. Maybe that's what makes us different from them. She nodded slowly. Very well. They leave now, and they don't come back. Ever. The spirits parted, creating a path to the vehicles. Agent Chen and her team didn't waste time arguing. They loaded their equipment and drove away as fast as the icy roads would allow. When their taillights disappeared, the supernatural army began to fade. The temperature returned to normal. The cemetery looked exactly like it always had, except now I could see Kate clearly, standing among the headstones like she belonged there. Thank you, she said. What happens now? Now we do what we've always done. We protect this place. We keep the truth alive, and we make sure the past isn't forgotten or exploited. Together? Together. Family takes care of family, Samuel. That's what I've been trying to teach you. That was 3 months ago. Officially, the incident never happened. The Office of Special Investigations doesn't exist in any public records, and Agent Chen's team never filed a report about supernatural encounters in Kentucky. But things changed at the Land Between the Lakes. The Bell Historical Site gets more visitors now, but they're different kinds of visitors. Serious historians, respectful tourists, people who come to learn rather than to exploit. The ghost hunters and thrill seekers seem to lose interest when they get close to the cemetery. They turn around and leave without ever really knowing why. Kate and I have developed an understanding. She appears to me during my evening patrols, usually as a normal woman in modern clothes. We talk about maintaining the site, about preserving the real history, about the responsibility that comes with protecting something important. She tells me stories about the other spirits she's in contact with, supernatural entities across the country who've been hunted by government agencies, exploited by paranormal investigators, or simply forgotten by a world that's moved on without them. There's a whole hidden community of ghosts and spirits, and they're organizing. They're tired of being treated like monsters or curiosities. The Bell Witch, it turns out, isn't just a local legend. She's become something like a supernatural civil rights leader. I've changed too. My reports are more detailed now, more protective of the site's integrity. I turn away commercial film crews and sensationalist television shows. I work with legitimate historians and archaeologists who treat the place with respect. And sometimes, late at night, I hear other voices. Not just Kate's, but dozens of others. Spirits who've been drawn to this place because it's become a refuge. A sanctuary where the supernatural can exist without being hunted or exploited. The government hasn't come back. I think Kate made her point clearly enough that they're looking for easier targets. But I know they're still out there, still hunting other entities who don't have the strength or knowledge to fight back. Kate says that's going to change. She's building a network, creating connections between isolated spirits, teaching them how to protect themselves and their territories. The Bell Witch isn't just haunting one family's farm anymore. She's become the protector of everyone who's caught between the world of the living and the world of the dead. My grandmother was right about the family curse. There is something that follows the Bell descendants. But it's not a curse, it's a responsibility. We're the guardians, the bridge between the worlds, the ones who make sure the past isn't forgotten or exploited. I still patrol the same territory, still file the same reports, still maintain the same historical sites. But now I know I'm not alone. When vandals approach, they turn back before they reach the cemetery. When exploitation threatens, equipment malfunctions, and investors lose interest. When the truth is in danger of being forgotten, people find themselves drawn to learn the real story. The Bell Witch is real. She's been real for 200 years, and she's not the monster the stories made her out to be. She's family, and family takes care of family. Even if some of the family happens to be dead. My name is Aaron Blackburn, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. Before that, I spent 8 years with the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. These days, I work the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's quiet work most of the time. I handle law enforcement issues, investigate illegal activities, and help keep these ancient mountains safe. People ask me why I left federal work for Park Service. The truth is, I needed the peace. The mountains called to me, maybe because of my family history here. My grandfather was ATF too, back in the 1922nd. He died in these same mountains during a raid on moonshiners. I grew up hearing stories about him, about how he was a hero who died in the line of duty. October 1984 was one of those perfect autumn months in the Blue Ridge. The leaves burned red and gold, and the morning fog rolled through the hollows like smoke. I'd been getting reports of illegal distilling operations starting up again in the remote areas. Nothing new. Mountain people have been making moonshine here for generations. It's part of the culture, part of who they are. But this felt different. The first report came from a hiker who smelled corn mash cooking somewhere up Whiskey Hollow. That's what locals called one of the deeper valleys, about 5 miles from the nearest road. You could only get there on foot or with an ATV, following old logging trails that twisted through thick forest. I knew the area well. My grandfather had died somewhere up that way, though the exact spot was never marked on any map I'd seen. The hollow got its name honestly. It had been moonshine country since before Prohibition. Families like the Washers and the Coopers had run stills up there for decades, until federal agents shut them down in the 1960s. When I hiked up to investigate, I expected to find some old-timer with a small operation. Maybe a grandpa teaching his grandson the family trade. Instead, I found something that made no sense at all. The still was there, all right, but it looked like it had stepped out of 1925. Everything was perfectly maintained, but completely wrong. The copper coils gleamed like new, but they were the old-style design they stopped making 50 years ago. The wooden fermentation barrels looked ancient, but showed fresh use. The stone furnace was built exactly like the ones in old photographs from my grandfather's case files. But here's what really got to me. There were no fresh tire tracks, no modern footprints, no camping gear, no trash, nothing that showed people had been there recently. Yet the mash was warm, the fire was still smoldering, and I could smell fresh corn liquor in the air. I set up surveillance equipment and came back the next morning. The cameras showed nothing. Empty forest, morning fog, nothing more. But the audio picked up sounds of work metal clanking, wood chopping, men talking in low voices. I played it back 3 times, and each time I heard the same thing. Voices using old mountain slang I'd only read in historical reports. That's when I started to think someone was playing games with me. Mountain people don't trust federal agents, and they sure don't trust anyone named Blackburn. My grandfather's raid had killed 3 men from local families. Even after 60 years, those wounds were still fresh. Maybe this was their way of messing with the Fed's grandson. But as I walked back down the trail that first day, I caught a whiff of something that stopped me cold. Corn mash, cooking fresh, coming from a hollow where my equipment said nobody was working. I'm not a man who believes in ghosts. I deal in facts, evidence, and the law. But standing there in that misty hollow, smelling moonshine cooking where no one should be, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a kid, listening to my grandmother's stories. I felt afraid. The next week, I came back, with better equipment. Modern surveillance cameras, motion sensors, and a radio setup that could record everything within a half-mile radius. If someone was running an operation up there, I'd catch them. I set up my base camp about a 1/4 mile from the still site, hidden in a thick stand of pine trees. From there, I could monitor everything without being seen. The plan was simple. Document the illegal operation, identify the operators, and make arrests. By sunset, my equipment was recording perfectly. I settled in for a long night of surveillance, drinking coffee from my thermos and watching the monitors. The forest was quiet except for normal night sounds: owls, raccoons, the wind in the trees. Around midnight, things started to change. First, I heard the sound of chopping wood. Steady, rhythmic, coming from the direction of the still. I checked my cameras, nothing visible. Just empty forest and the green glow of night vision. But the sound was clear on my audio equipment. Then I smelled smoke. Wood smoke, with that distinctive smell of a hardwood fire. the kind you'd use for heating a still. I grabbed my binoculars and moved closer, staying in the tree line. What I saw made me question my own eyes. There was a fire burning in the stone furnace, casting dancing shadows across the still. But I couldn't see who had lit it. The flames were real. I could feel the heat from 50 yards away. But the cameras still showed nothing. I radioed for backup, but got only static. My radio worked fine earlier, but now it was picking up voices speaking in that same old-fashioned mountain dialect. They were talking about the federal man's boy and keeping the operation running. That's when I realized they were talking about me. I moved closer, staying in the shadows. The still was working. I could hear the bubble and hiss of boiling mash, the drip of fresh liquor into collection jars. The whole operation was running at full capacity. But I couldn't see a single person. Then, in the corner of my vision, I caught movement. An old man in work clothes was standing by the still, checking the temperature. He wore suspenders and a felt hat, clothes that looked like they came from my grandfather's era. For just a second, he looked solid and real as anyone. Then he turned toward me, and I saw his face clearly in the firelight. Half of it was missing. A shotgun blast had taken away his left eye and cheek, leaving raw bone gleaming in the darkness. I stumbled backward, knocking over my own tripod. When I looked again, he was gone. The fire was out. The still was cold and silent. But in my headphones, I could hear him laughing. I packed up my equipment and hiked out that night, telling myself it was a hallucination. Stress, too much coffee, tricks of light and shadow. But I knew what I'd seen. And I knew that laugh I'd heard it before, in old family stories. The next morning, I drove to the county library and pulled out historical records about moonshine operations in the area. What I found made my blood run cold. There had been a raid in Whiskey Hollow in October 1924. 3 moonshiners were killed. Ezra Cooper, his son Thomas, and their partner, James Washer. The ATF agent leading the raid was my grandfather, Samuel Blackburn. The photograph in the newspaper showed the aftermath. 3 bodies covered with sheets, a destroyed still, and my grandfather standing grimly in the background. One of the bodies was described as having severe facial trauma from defensive gunfire. Ezra Cooper, the man I'd seen by the still. According to the article, the moonshiners had been shot while trying to surrender. Local families claimed it was murder, that the federal agents had planted evidence and used excessive force. But the official report said the moonshiners had fired first. I stared at my grandfather's face in that old photograph. He looked sick, like a man who'd done something he couldn't live with. That afternoon, I called my grandmother, the only family member still alive who remembered those times. "Gran," I said, "tell me the truth about Grandpa's raid in Whiskey Hollow." There was a long silence on the phone. "Aaron," she finally said, "some stones are better left unturned. Your grandfather carried that burden until the day he died." "What burden?" "The burden of knowing what really happened up there, and knowing he couldn't fix it." She hung up before I could ask more questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man with half a face, standing by a still that shouldn't exist, making moonshine with hands that should have been bones 60 years ago. And I kept hearing that laugh in my mind, echoing through the mountains like a promise of things to come. I should have reported what I'd seen and requested a transfer. Any reasonable person would have. But I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was family pride, or maybe I needed to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Either way, I went back. This time, I came prepared for anything. I brought camping gear, enough food for 3 days, and every piece of recording equipment I could get my hands on. If something supernatural was happening in Whiskey Hollow, I was going to document it. I set up camp in a different location, closer to the still but with better cover. For 2 days, nothing happened. Normal forest sounds, normal readings on all my equipment. I started to think I'd imagined the whole thing. Then, on the 3rd night, they came back. It started with the smell of cooking mash drifting through the trees. Then the sound of men working, chopping wood, hauling water, tending the fire. This time, I was ready. I had multiple cameras positioned around the still site, all recording. But what they captured defied everything I thought I knew about reality. The men appeared gradually, like morning fog taking shape. First, just shadows, moving in the firelight, then clear figures in old-fashioned clothes. There were 3 of them, an older man with a full beard, a younger man who looked like his son, and a 3rd man with a limp. Ezra Cooper, Thomas Cooper, and James Washer. The three moonshiners my grandfather had killed. They worked with the easy efficiency of men who'd done this job 1,000 times. The older man Ezra directed the operation, while his son hauled water from a nearby spring. The third man, James, tended the fire and checked the temperature. They were solid, real, casting shadows and moving objects. But my modern equipment couldn't see them. The cameras recorded empty forest while my eyes watched dead men making moonshine. I spent hours observing them, taking notes by hand since my cameras were useless. They followed a strict routine, working through the night and disappearing before dawn. Their conversation was casual, normal, discussing the quality of the corn, the purity of the spring water, family news from 60 years ago. Then Ezra looked directly at me. "Federal man's watching us again," he said to his companions, never taking his eyes off my hiding place. "Let him watch," Thomas replied. "He's got his grandfather's eyes. Maybe his grandfather's conscience too," James added hopefully. Ezra walked toward my position. I should have run, but I couldn't move. He stopped 10 feet away, and I could see the shotgun damage to his face clearly. Bone and sinew where skin should be, his left eye a dark socket. "You Samuel Blackburn's boy?" he asked. "His grandson," I managed to say. "Good. We've been waiting for you to come home." "I'm not home. I'm investigating an illegal distillation operation." Ezra laughed, that same laugh I'd heard on my recordings. "Son, we've been running this still for 60 years, waiting for a Blackburn to come back and set things right. Your grandfather knew the truth. Now it's your turn to learn it." He gestured toward the still, where Thomas and James continued working. "This here's our life's work, our family business. We never hurt nobody, never sold to children, never caused trouble in town. We just made good liquor for good people. You were breaking federal law." "Federal law?" Ezra spat on the ground. "Federal law said we couldn't make our family's livelihood. Federal law said we couldn't follow the trade our daddies taught us. Federal law brought armed men to our home to kill us for making corn liquor. My grandfather was doing his job. Your grandfather was following orders from corrupt men who wanted our land for logging. Rights. They needed us gone, so they made us criminals." I felt my world tilting. "That's not what the reports said. Reports lie, boy. Dead men don't." Ezra moved closer, and I could smell grave dirt and old whiskey on him. "Your grandfather knew it was a setup, knew we weren't dangerous. But he was young, following orders, trusting the system." "Then why did he shoot you?" "He didn't." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Samuel Blackburn never fired his weapon that night. It was the other agent's men who'd been paid by the logging company. Your grandfather tried to stop it, tried to arrest us peaceful-like. When the shooting started, he was the one who called for help. Tried to save us." Thomas looked up from the still. "Last thing I saw was your grandfather kneeling beside me, pressing his hands against my chest, trying to stop the bleeding, crying like a baby. He carried that guilt his whole life," James added. "Died knowing he couldn't tell the truth without destroying his career and his family." "But he could have spoken up," I protested. "He could have exposed the corruption." Ezra nodded sadly. "He tried. That's why he died young. Car accident on a mountain road. Same year he started asking questions about our case. The implication hung in the air like smoke from their fire." "So, what do you want from me?" I asked. "Same thing we wanted from him," Ezra said. "Justice, truth, a chance to rest peaceful." "How can I give you that? You're dead. The case is closed. Cases can be reopened. Truth can be told. A man's grandson can finish what his grandfather started." They were fading now, becoming translucent in the firelight. The still continued operating, but I could see through the men to the trees behind them. "Find the real evidence," Ezra called as he disappeared. "Your grandfather hid it, waiting for the right time. Find it and set us all free." Then they were gone. The fire went out, the still fell silent, but the smell of moonshine lingered in the air, and I knew my life had just changed forever. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. When dawn came, I hiked out of the hollow with my mind racing. If the ghosts were telling the truth, and I was starting to believe they were, then my grandfather had hidden evidence of federal corruption somewhere. The question was where. I drove to my grandmother's house in Staunton, arriving before she'd finished her morning coffee. She took one look at my face and knew something had changed. "You saw them, didn't you?" she said quietly. You knew? Your grandfather told me everything before he died. Made me promise to keep it secret until someone in the family was ready to hear it. She led me to her attic and opened an old trunk I'd seen 100 times but never been allowed to explore. Inside were my grandfather's personal effects from his ATF years badges, photographs, and a locked metal box. He said if anyone came asking the right questions, I should give them this. The box was heavy, filled with documents, photographs, and what looked like audio recordings on old wire spools. My grandmother had no way to play them, but I recognized the format from my federal training. There's something else, she said, pulling. About a letter addressed to my grandson, if he proves worthy. My hands shook as I opened it. Asterisk Aaron. Asterisk asterisk. If you're reading this, then you've met the Cooper family and James Washer. I've carried their deaths on my conscience for 40 years, and I pray you're the one who can give them peace. Asterisk. Asterisk. The raid on Whiskey Hollow was ordered by Deputy Director Morrison, who was taking bribes from Consolidated Lumber Company. They wanted the Cooper land for logging rights, but the family wouldn't sell. Making them federal criminals was easier than legal purchase. Asterisk asterisk. I was ordered to arrest them, but Morrison's men had orders to shoot. When I realized what was happening, I tried to stop it. The evidence in this box proves the conspiracy recorded conversations, financial records, Morrison's written orders. Asterisk asterisk. I tried to expose it in 1925, but Morrison threatened our family. He promised your grandmother would have an accident if I spoke up. I chose to protect the living over justice for the dead. Asterisk asterisk. I was wrong. Asterisk asterisk. The recording device in this box contains Morrison's confession, recorded without his knowledge. Use it to clear the Cooper name and expose the truth. Give those good men the peace they deserve. Asterisk asterisk. Your loving grandfather, asterisk asterisk. Samuel Blackburn Times. I spent the next 3 hours going through the evidence. It was all their financial records showing payments from the lumber company to federal agents, correspondence between Morrison and Consolidated Lumber, and most damning of all, a wire recording of Morrison admitting the whole scheme. But as I prepared to contact federal authorities, my phone rang. Aaron Blackburn? The voice was official, clipped. Yes. This is Deputy Director Harrison, ATF. We understand you've been investigating unauthorized activities in the George Washington National Forest. Yes, sir. Illegal distillation. We're taking over the case. You're to cease all investigation immediately and turn over any evidence you've collected. Sir, I don't think you understand what I've found. Mr. Blackburn, this is not a request. Report to the regional office tomorrow morning with all materials. This case is now classified. The line went dead. That night, I returned to Whiskey Hollow with my grandfather's evidence box. I had to warn the spirits, had to tell them what was happening. The federal government was trying to bury the truth again, just like they had 60 years ago. I found them waiting for me, all three standing around there still like they knew I was coming. They're shutting down the investigation, I told them. Same as before. Ezra nodded grimly. Some things never change. Morrison's dead, but his kind ain't. What do I do? If I turn over the evidence, they'll destroy it. Then don't turn it over, Thomas said simply. I'll lose my job, maybe face federal charges. Your grandfather faced the same choice, James pointed out. He chose wrong. What will you choose? I looked at the evidence box in my hands, then at the 3 dead men who'd been waiting 60 years for justice. What happens if I expose this? Will you finally rest? We'll rest when the truth is told and our names are cleared. Ezra said, when the world knows we died as honest men, not criminals. And if I fail, then we keep making moonshine until someone else with the courage to tell truth comes along. I thought about my grandfather, carrying this guilt his whole life. About these 3 men, trapped for decades because of corruption and cowardice. About all the other injustices that stayed buried because good people chose safety over truth. I'll do it, I said. I'll expose everything. The spirits smiled the first time I'd seen them happy. Your grandfather would be proud, Ezra said. Then the hollow erupted in gunfire. Federal agents emerged from the tree line, wearing tactical gear and carrying automatic weapons. Harrison's voice boomed through a bullhorn. Aaron Blackburn, you are under federal arrest. Drop the evidence and surrender immediately. I dove behind the stone furnace as bullets tore through the trees around me. The spirits vanished instantly, but I could hear them calling out warnings. Behind the oak tree, 2 more coming from the north. A dozen agents surrounded me, all with weapons drawn. I clutched the evidence box to my chest, knowing it was the only proof of my grandfather's innocence and the Cooper's honor. "Last chance, Blackburn," Harrison called. "Give us the box, and we'll consider this a misunderstanding." I thought about my grandfather, facing the same impossible choice: family safety versus justice, career versus truth. I made a different choice than he did. "Go to hell," I shouted back. That's when the mountain itself seemed to come alive. The first sign something had changed was the temperature. The October night turned winter cold in seconds, our breath visible in suddenly frigid air. Then came the fog, not natural mountain mist, but thick, choking vapor that rolled up from the hollow like smoke from a massive fire. The federal agents started shooting wildly as shapes moved through the fog, but their bullets passed harmlessly through targets that struck back with very real force. I watched a tactical officer fly backward as if hit by an invisible truck, his weapon spinning away into the darkness. Ezra Cooper materialized beside me, no longer the faded spirit I'd been talking to. He looked solid, powerful, and very angry. "Nobody threatens a Blackburn on our mountain," he growled. The other spirits appeared throughout the hollow, not just Thomas and James, but dozens of them. Other moonshiners, other mountain people who'd died at federal hands over the decades. They moved through the agents like wolves through sheep, disarming them, destroying their equipment, sending them fleeing into the night. Director Harrison tried to run but found himself face to face with a woman in 1930 seconds dress, half her head blown away by a sniper's bullet. "You boys never learn," she said sadly, then backhanded him 20 feet down the hollow. Within minutes, it was over. The surviving agents fled, leaving their weapons and equipment scattered across the forest floor. I stood in the sudden silence, still clutching my grandfather's evidence box. "Well," said Ezra, brushing off his hands, "that was refreshing. What happens now?" I asked. "Now you tell the truth," Thomas said. "All of it. Who's going to believe me?" "You'd be surprised," James replied with a grin. "Mountain folk have long memories, and there's more evidence out there than what your grandfather saved." Over the next month, I did exactly what they asked. I contacted historians, journalists, and honest federal agents. I shared my grandfather's evidence and told the whole story, including the supernatural parts. Most people thought I was crazy, but the documentary evidence was too solid to ignore. Financial records don't lie, and recorded confessions speak for themselves. The Morrison conspiracy was exposed, my grandfather was posthumously vindicated, and the Cooper family name was officially cleared. The moonshine still in Whiskey Hollow fell silent the night the truth was published. I visited it once more and found only cold stone and rusted metal. But carved into the oak tree beside the furnace were 3 names: Ezra Cooper, Thomas Cooper, James Washer. Below them, in fresh carving, was a 4th name: Samuel Blackburn. And at the bottom, in my grandfather's handwriting, were the words, "Truth Teller." I kept my job with the Park Service, though I was quietly transferred to a different forest. The federal agents who'd tried to silence me faced their own investigations. Harrison was indicted for conspiracy and destruction of evidence. But the most important change was personal. I'd learned that some things are worth more than career safety, things like truth, justice, and family honor. My grandfather had tried to teach me that lesson from beyond the grave, using 3 stubborn mountain spirits who refused to let injustice rest. These days, when I patrol my new forest, I pay attention to old stories and local folklore. I've learned that sometimes the dead really do speak, and they usually have something important to say. And sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls through the mountains, I catch the faint smell of corn mash cooking somewhere in the distance. It doesn't worry me anymore. It reminds me that some people, living or dead, will never stop fighting for what's right, even if it takes 60 years. My name is Ezra Mullins, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I work in the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky, specifically the Red River Gorge section. Most folks know me for cave rescue work, I've pulled 47 people out of underground situations they had no business getting into. I grew up in these mountains. My great-grandmother used to tell stories about something she called the hollow folk, people who lived in places that weren't quite here and weren't quite there. She'd warn me to stay away from certain caves, especially the ones that felt too warm or too cold. I figured they were just old mountain tales meant to keep kids from wandering into dangerous places. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah died in a car accident on Highway 27. Our son Jake went to live with my parents while I tried to put the pieces back together. Work became everything to me. Cave rescue gave me purpose. Bringing people home safely when I couldn't bring Sarah home. It was October 1983. One of those weird, warm spells we sometimes get before winter hits hard. 3 college kids from the University of Kentucky had gone missing in a restricted area near Chimney Top Rock. Geology students, the report said. They were supposed to be mapping a new cave system for some research project. Their names were Jennifer Walsh, Mark Stevens, and David Park. All seniors, all experienced cavers. They'd filed a proper route plan and carried emergency beacons. Everything by the book. That's what worried me. Experienced people don't just vanish when they follow protocol. My partner, Cole Davidson, and I got the call on a Tuesday morning. Cole was younger than me, only been on the job 3 years, but he was good underground. Steady hands, didn't panic. We'd worked together on plenty of rescues. The drive to their last known location took 2 hours on increasingly rough roads. The final 8 miles were hiking trails that wound through thick hardwood forest. October leaves crunched under our boots, and the air smelled like wood smoke and dying leaves. We found their camp about noon. That's when I knew something was wrong. Everything was too neat. The tents were set up in a perfect triangle. Sleeping bags laid out flat and smooth. Campfire built but never lit, with kindling arranged like someone was planning a magazine photo. All their expensive caving equipment, ropes, lights, measuring tools, sat in careful piles. But their personal stuff was gone. Wallets, IDs, phones, keys. Even their water bottles were missing, but they'd left behind $1,000 worth of gear. Maybe they went exploring and someone robbed the camp, Cole suggested. I shook my head. Who hikes 8 miles to steal water bottles and leaves behind equipment worth more than most people's cars? The cave entrance was about 100 yards from their camp, hidden behind a wall of rhododendron bushes. The moment we got close, I felt it. Temperature dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath started fogging, even though it was warm everywhere else. Cole noticed it too. That's not normal, is it? I'd been in hundreds of caves. Cold air flows out of most of them, but this felt different. This felt like winter in July, like something was pulling all the warmth out of the world. We called into the cave, following standard procedure. Our voices echoed back strangely, like the sound was bending around corners that shouldn't exist. I tried the radio to report our position, but instead of static, I heard something that sounded almost like music. Faint, far away, but definitely music. Equipment malfunction, I told Cole, but my gut said otherwise. We checked our gear and started into the cave. The entrance was bigger than I'd expected, about 8 feet high and wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. The walls were limestone, normal for this area, but there were marks carved into the rock, not recent. Scratches from climbing gear, old marks, worn smooth by time. 50 feet in, I found the first thing that made my skin crawl. Candle wax. Fresh candle wax dripped on the cave floor, still soft to the touch. The college kids had LED lights, not candles. And the wax looked old-fashioned, like the thick white candles my grandmother used to make. Ezra? Cole called from ahead. You need to see this. He was standing next to a pile of stones that definitely hadn't fallen naturally. Someone had stacked them carefully, like a trail marker. Beyond that, carved into the cave wall, was a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked a little like Cherokee writing, but not quite. The lines were too flowing, too organic. We kept following the main passage. Every 50 feet or so, we found another stack of stones, another symbol. Whoever made them knew these caves well, better than our maps showed. That's when we found Jennifer. She was sitting upright against the cave wall, about 400 feet from the entrance. Eyes open, looking straight ahead like she was watching something we couldn't see. No injuries I could spot. No blood. But when I touched her neck to check for a pulse, her skin was ice cold. Cave temperature cold. She'd been dead less than 24 hours, according to her condition, but her body temperature had already dropped to match the cave. That's not how human bodies work. It takes days for that to happen, not hours. Cole was getting nervous. I could hear it in his breathing, see it in how he kept checking over his shoulder. "We should get help," he said. "Bring a full team." Part of me agreed, but Mark and David were still missing somewhere in this mountain, and I'd never left people behind before. Even if Jennifer was beyond help, those boys might not be. I just didn't know yet that some people have been beyond help for a very long time. We radioed for a recovery team for Jennifer and kept going deeper. The cave system was bigger than our maps showed, with passages branching off in directions that didn't match the geological surveys. My compass started acting strange, pointing toward the deepest part of the cave, no matter which way I turned. "Magnetic interference," I told Cole, but I'd never seen anything like it. We found Mark Stevens 800 feet deeper, in exactly the same position as Jennifer. Sitting upright, eyes open, stone cold. No signs of violence or struggle. It was like they'd just decided to sit down and die. But people don't do that. Especially not experienced cavers who know how to handle emergencies. Cole was getting worse. He kept muttering under his breath, looking around like he was hearing things. When I asked what was wrong, he said he thought someone was calling his name from deeper in the cave. I didn't hear anything except the drip of water and our own breathing. That's when we found the stairs, carved right into the cave floor, leading down into a passage that wasn't on any map. The stone was worn smooth by countless feet, but there were no records of this cave system being used by anyone. Cherokee tribes in this area considered certain caves sacred, but they didn't carve stairways. The stairs descended for about 100 feet, then opened into a chamber the size of a basketball court. And that's where things stopped making any kind of sense. There were buildings, not cave formations that looked like buildings. Actual wooden structures with walls and roofs and windows. Oil lamps flickered in some of the windows, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. The whole scene looked like a frontier settlement from 100 years ago. I grabbed Cole's arm. "We're leaving, right now." But he pulled away from me. "Don't you hear them, Ezra? They're singing." That's when I heard it too. Voices echoing from the buildings, harmonizing in a song that sounded familiar but wrong. Like a hymn I'd heard in church as a kid, but with words I couldn't quite make out. A woman appeared in the doorway of the largest building. She was maybe 60 years old, wearing a long dark dress that belonged in a museum. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face had the weathered look of someone who'd lived a hard mountain life. "Evening, boys," she called out. Like finding two park rangers in an underground settlement was the most natural thing in the world. "Y'all look lost." Cole started walking toward her. I grabbed his shoulder, but he shrugged me off. "Ma'am," he said, "we're looking for a missing person. College student named David Park." She smiled, and her teeth were too white, too perfect. "Oh, young David's with us now, safe and sound. Why don't y'all come in for some coffee? It's been a while since we had visitors." Every instinct I had was screaming to run. But Cole was already halfway to the building, and David might be inside. I couldn't leave either of them. The woman introduced herself as Granny Whitlock. She led us into what looked like a general store, complete with wooden shelves lined with old-fashioned goods. Jars of preserves, bolts of cloth, tools that looked hand-forged. Everything was too clean, too perfect, like a museum display. Other people started emerging from the shadows, men in work clothes that looked like they belonged in the 1800s. Women in long dresses, children who stared at us with curious eyes but never spoke. All of them had that same too-white smile. "Sit, sit," Granny Whitlock said, gesturing to chairs around a pot-bellied stove. "Tell me about yourselves. I knew your great-grandmother, Ezra Mullins, Sarah Thacker, before she married. Sweet girl, she used to visit us when she was young." My blood went cold. My great-grandmother had been dead for 20 years, and her maiden name was Sarah Thacker, but I'd never told this woman my last name. "How do you know that?" I asked. "Oh, honey, we know lots of things down here. Time moves different in the hollow. Sarah used to bring us news from the outside world, back when we still cared about such things." Cole was sitting by the stove, completely relaxed, like this was all perfectly normal. "Where's David?" he asked. "David's resting," she said. Poor boy was so tired when he found us. Been walking in circles for days, trying to map passages that don't want to be mapped. We gave him a place to sleep. I need to see him, I said. Of course you do. But first, let me tell you about our little community. Her eyes had a strange shine to them, like candlelight reflecting off water. We've been here since 1893. Mining accidents sealed us in, but we learned to make do. Learned to make the mountain provide for us. She gestured around the store. Everything we need is right here. Food that never spoils. Water that never runs dry. And the best part, we never get older. Never get sick. Never have to say goodbye to the people we love. The way she said it made my skin crawl. It sounded too much like the fairy tales my great-grandmother used to tell, about people who got trapped in magical places where time didn't work right. The mining accident, I said slowly. That was 90 years ago. Has it been that long? She seemed genuinely surprised. Time really does fly. But yes, we've been here since then. All of us. Same families, same faces, same stories. Wouldn't you like that, Ezra? No more losing people you love. No more watching them drive away and never come home. She knew about Sarah. Somehow, she knew about my wife. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Cole's hair was starting to change. Just at the temples, but it was definitely getting gray. And there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there an hour ago. Cole, I said quietly, we need to go. But he was staring into the fire with a dreamy expression. They're offering us a home, Ezra. A place where nothing bad ever happens. Nothing bad except dying, I said. Granny Whitlock laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Oh, honey, nobody dies here. We just change. Become part of the mountain. Part of the hollow. Your friend David understands now. He's learning our ways. Show me, David. Right now. Her smile never wavered. If you insist. But I should warn you, he's not quite the same boy who wandered into our little community. The mountain changes people, usually for the better. She led us to a smaller building behind the store. Inside, David Park was sitting at a table, writing in a notebook. He looked up when we entered, and I saw immediately what she meant about change. His eyes were different, still brown, but with flecks of silver that seemed to move in the lamplight. His skin had a waxy quality, like old candles. And when he smiled, his teeth were that same perfect white. Rangers, he said in a voice that was somehow both his and not his. Granny Whitlock told me you'd come looking for us. That's very kind, but unnecessary. I've found exactly what I was looking for. David, we need to get you out of here. Your professors are worried sick. He tilted his head like he was trying to remember something. Professors? Oh, you mean the surface people? I don't think about them much anymore. Why would I want to go back to a world where people grow old and die when I can stay here forever? I grabbed his arm to pull him up, and his skin was ice cold. Not just cool, actually cold, like touching a stone in winter. The boy's made his choice, Granny Whitlock said gently. Just like your partner is making his. I turned around, and Cole was gone. I ran back to the main building, shouting Cole's name. The settlement people watched me with mild interest, like I was entertainment they'd seen many times before. None of them seemed surprised that my partner had vanished. I found him in what looked like a blacksmith shop, talking to a man who was working at a forge that somehow burned without any visible fuel. The smith was explaining how to make horseshoes that would never wear out, nails that would never rust. Cole! I grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. The gray in his hair had spread, and his face looked older, more weathered. We're leaving. Now. He looked at me with confusion, like he was trying to remember who I was. Leaving? But Ezra, this is incredible. These people have been living here for 90 years without aging. Think about what we could learn from them. Look at yourself, I said, dragging him to a mirror hanging on the wall. Look at what they're doing to you. His reflection showed a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. The Cole Davidson I knew was 26 years old with dark hair and smooth skin. The man in the mirror looked 40, with gray streaks and worry lines. For a moment, awareness flickered in his eyes. What's happening to me? They're stealing your life, I said, little by little, and when they're done, you'll be just like David, a hollow copy of yourself. But the awareness faded as quickly as it came. Don't be silly, Ezra. I feel better than I have in years, stronger, more focused. Granny Whitlock appeared beside us like she'd stepped out of the shadows. Your friend is adapting beautifully. Some people take to the hollow faster than others. It usually means they were already looking for something our world provides. What do you want? I demanded. Want? Nothing you're not willing to give. But Ezra, honey, you've been carrying such a heavy load. All that guilt about your wife, all that anger at yourself for not being there when she needed you. Wouldn't it be nice to put that down? She knew things she shouldn't know, things I'd never told anyone. We offer peace, she continued. An end to loss, to pain, to the fear of losing people you love. Your great-grandmother understood that. She used to visit us regularly, especially after your great-grandfather died. You're lying. She never mentioned this place. She never mentioned it to you, Granny Whitlock corrected. But she told your grandmother. And your grandmother told your mother. The women in your family have always known about us. We've been waiting for you to find your way here. The smith handed Cole a horseshoe that gleamed like silver. Feel how perfect that is, he said. No flaws, no weak points. It will last forever, just like everything else we make here. Cole held it reverently, like it was made of gold instead of iron. I was losing him. Whatever these people were doing, it was working. Cole was becoming like them, and David was already gone. I had to remember something from my great-grandmother's stories that might help. Iron. She'd always said iron was protection against things that weren't quite natural. And running water. Spirits couldn't cross running water. I still had my multi-tool in my belt, steel and iron. I pulled it out and grabbed Cole's hand, pressing the cold metal against his palm. He yelped and jerked away, suddenly looking more like himself. That burns. Good, I said. It means you're still human. Granny Whitlock's expression hardened. Now that's just rude, Ezra. We're offering hospitality, and you're trying to hurt your friend. You're not offering anything, you're taking their lives, their memories, their futures. We're saving them from disappointment and heartbreak, from growing old and dying alone. Her voice was getting sharper, less grandmotherly. Your wife died because the surface world is cruel and random. Here, she would have lived forever. The mention of Sarah hit like a physical blow. Don't you dare talk about my wife. Sarah Mullins, born Sarah Collins, died on Highway 27 when a drunk driver ran a red light. Granny Whitlock's eyes were glowing now, actually glowing, like coals. She was coming home from buying groceries for your son's birthday party. Chocolate cake mix and vanilla ice cream. She never got to see him blow out his candles. I could barely breathe. The details were too specific, too personal. And worse, they were all true. But if you stay with us, she continued, you could see her again. We have ways of bringing people back, of reuniting families. All you have to do is let go of the surface world and embrace the hollow. For a moment, I almost believed her. The promise of seeing Sarah again, of undoing the worst day of my life, was so tempting it physically hurt to resist. But I remembered something else my great-grandmother used to say. The dead should stay dead, Ezra. When you try to bring them back, you get something that looks like them but isn't them, and it's hungry for what it used to be. You can't bring back the dead, I said. You can only make copies, hollow copies. Her face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little boy. We offer you paradise, and you throw it back in our faces. The temperature in the settlement dropped even further. Ice started forming on the windows. The oil lamps flickered and dimmed. Cole, I said urgently, we have to go, right now. But Cole was backing away from me, toward the other settlement people. I'm not leaving, Ezra. This is where I belong. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. Singing. But not the gentle hymns from before. This was different. Older. Angrier. The voices were coming from everywhere at once, echoing off the cave walls with a sound like breaking glass. And in the harmony, I heard Sarah's voice. The singing got louder, and I realized the voices weren't just coming from the settlement people. They were coming from the caves themselves, from passages I couldn't see, from spaces that shouldn't exist. And Sarah's voice was clearest of all. She appeared at the edge of the settlement, walking, out of the shadows like she'd been there all along. She looked exactly like she had the day she died. Blonde hair, blue eyes, that soft smile I'd fallen in love with. But her skin had the same waxy quality as David's, and her eyes held that silver gleam. "Hello, Ezra," she said, and her voice was honey and broken glass. "I've been waiting for you." I knew it wasn't really her. Couldn't be her. But seeing her face, hearing her voice, made every rational thought evaporate. I took a step toward her before catching myself. "You're not Sarah." "I'm exactly who you want me to be," she said. "I remember everything. Our first date at the drive-in, our wedding day, the night Jake was born. I remember loving you, and I remember dying wishing I could stay." Granny Whitlock smiled with satisfaction. "The mountain remembers everything, Ezra. Every person who's ever walked these hills, every love story, every tragedy, we can bring back anyone you've lost." The thing that looked like Sarah held out her hand. "Come home, baby. Come home to where nothing can hurt us ever again." I wanted to take her hand more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. But I forced myself to remember what my great-grandmother had taught me about the Hollow folk. "What did I give you for our first anniversary?" I asked. Sarah Thing smiled. "A locket with our picture inside." Wrong. I'd given her a pair of earrings shaped like daisies because they were her favorite flower. The locket came for our second anniversary. "You're not my wife," I said, and saying it out loud felt like tearing my heart out. "You're just wearing her face." The thing's expression didn't change, but the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "Does it matter? I love you just like she did. I can be everything she was, and more." Sarah wouldn't want me to stay here. She'd want me to go home to our son. "Jake," the Sarah Thing said, and now there was something cruel in her voice. "Poor little Jake, living with his grandparents because his daddy can't handle being alone. How long before he stops asking when you're coming home?" It was like she'd reached into my chest and squeezed my heart with ice-cold fingers. The guilt I carried about abandoning my son, about losing myself in work instead of being the father he needed, was my deepest shame. "Stay with us," she continued, "and you'll never have to face that disappointment in his eyes again. Never have to admit you failed him, just like you failed me." I almost broke then, almost gave in to the promise of escape from responsibility and pain. But then I heard something that changed everything. Footsteps. Running footsteps, coming from the cave entrance above. A rescue team. Someone had gotten my radio message before the equipment started malfunctioning. "Help!" I shouted as loud as I could. "Down here! Cave in danger!" Granny Whitlock's face contorted with fury. "No outsiders. Not in our sanctuary." The settlement people started moving, all of them at once, flowing toward the stairs like water. But they moved wrong, too fluid, like their bodies weren't quite solid. I had maybe 30 seconds before the rescue team walked into a trap. I pulled out my multi-tool and ran to the largest building, the one that seemed to be the center of everything. If this was like the fairy tales, there had to be something anchoring the hollow to this place. Something keeping the settlement existing between worlds. I found it on a table in what looked like Granny Whitlock's house. An old Bible, leather-bound and worn, with Whitlock family embossed on the cover. The pages were yellow with age, and the whole book hummed with some kind of energy. "Don't touch that." The Sarah Thing was right behind me, but her voice had changed. It wasn't Sarah's voice anymore. It was something older, hungrier. I grabbed the Bible and ran. The settlement people poured after me, but they moved, like they were underwater, like the physical world was hard for them to navigate. The Sarah Thing was fastest, her form shifting and blurring as she chased me. I reached the stairs and started climbing, clutching the Bible to my chest. Behind me, the settlement was coming apart. Buildings flickered like mirages. The oil lamps went out one by one. "You don't understand." Granny Whitlock's voice echoed from below. "Without us, they'll die, all of them. David, your friend, everyone who's become part of the Hollow." I hesitated. If destroying this place killed Cole and David, I'd be a murderer. But then I heard Cole's voice, faint but getting stronger. "Ezra, where are you? What happened to me?" The iron in my multi-tool had broken whatever hold they had on him. He was fighting his way back to himself. I kept climbing. The rescue team was just entering the cave when I reached the surface. 3 rangers with full gear, led by my supervisor, Jim Hartley. "Ezra, what the hell happened down there? We lost radio contact 4 hours ago." "Cave in danger," I gasped. "Get everyone back, now." Behind me, the cave entrance started to collapse. Not a natural cave-in, the rocks were falling upward, sealing the opening from the inside. Cole stumbled out just as the last stones fell into place. He looked like he'd aged 20 years, but his eyes were clear and human again. "David," I said. "David Park is still down there." But even as I said it, I knew he was gone. The hollow folk had claimed him completely, made him one of them. When their anchor to our world broke, he'd gone back with them to whatever place they really came from. The Bible in my hands crumbled to dust. The official report said David Park died in a cave-in caused by unstable limestone formations. Jennifer Walsh and Mark Stevens were listed as victims of hypothermia after getting lost in an unmapped cave system. The area was declared geologically unstable and permanently closed to the public. Cole was given medical leave for what the doctors called severe stress-induced aging. They said it was impossible but couldn't explain why a 26-year-old man suddenly looked 50. He took early retirement 6 months later and moved to Florida. We don't talk much, but he sends Christmas cards. I transferred to surface operations. Couldn't handle being underground anymore. Every cave I entered, I heard singing in the walls. The hardest part was facing David Park's parents. I told them their son died trying to help his friends, which was true enough. I just didn't mention that he chose to stay dead. But the story didn't end when the cave collapsed. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my mother. She was worried about Jake, my son. He'd been having dreams, she said. Dreams about his mother calling to him from deep underground, promising him a place where families never got separated. I drove to my parents' house that same day and found Jake sitting in the backyard, staring at the tree line behind their property. He was 8 years old, but there was something in his eyes that looked ancient. "Dad," he said without looking at me, "Mom wants you to come home." I knelt beside him, my blood running cold. "Jake, your mom is gone. You know that." "She's not gone," he said with the certainty only children possess. "She's waiting, in the hollow places where the mountain keeps things safe." I spent the next hour explaining to my son why he couldn't trust the voices in his dreams, why he had to promise never to go looking for caves or hidden places in the mountains. He listened solemnly and promised, but I could see in his eyes that part of him was already planning to break that promise when he got older. "The women in my family have always known about the hollow folk," Granny Whitlock had said. Maybe the men in my family were susceptible too. I started researching our family history, going back through old records and death certificates. What I found made me sick. My great-grandfather hadn't died in a mining accident like I'd been told. He'd disappeared in a cave system in 1962. My grandfather's brother vanished while hunting in 1978. 3 male cousins over the past 50 years all disappeared in circumstances involving caves or deep woods. And all of them left behind wives who claimed they'd been called home to the mountain. I think the hollow folk have been watching my family for generations, waiting for the right moment to add us to their collection. They got David Park, and they almost got Cole and me. Now they're calling to my son. I moved Jake and myself to Colorado, as far from Kentucky mountains as I could manage. But distance doesn't seem to matter much. He still has the dreams. Still talks about his mother singing lullabies from deep underground. Sometimes, late at night, I hear her too. The thing that wears Sarah's face isn't done with me. None of them are. The hollow folk are patient. They have all the time in the world to wait for us to come to them, or for us to bring our children. I'm writing this down because I need people to know the truth. If you're ever exploring caves in Appalachian mountains and you find buildings or settlements that aren't on any map, don't accept their hospitality. Don't listen when they offer you everything you've ever wanted. And whatever you do, don't trust the voices that sound like people you've lost. The dead should stay dead. When they come back, they're always hungry for what they used to be. And they're always looking for more people to join them in the hollow places where time doesn't work right and families never have to say goodbye. Even if it means those families aren't quite human anymore.